Half a year after our wedding, my mother-in-law slammed a heavy leather-bound lease agreement onto my imported dining table. The thick document knocked over my crystal water glass, sending ice water spilling across the polished mahogany. "Your apartment belongs to the family now," she declared with a cold smile. "You must pay $2,700 in rent every month directly to me." I did not raise my voice or shed a single tear. I simply smiled, wiped my mouth with my linen napkin, and replied, "Then I will just move back to my apartment." My husband Desmond froze mid-sip of his bourbon. His eyes widened in pure confusion as he asked, "What apartment?" He had absolutely no idea that the luxury high-rise penthouse we lived in was nothing more than the guest suite of the real estate empire I actually owned. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their fake wealthy facade and left them facing federal charges, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind your entitled in-laws exactly who they are dealing with. My name is Zoya. I am 32 years old and I work as a luxury real estate stager and interior architect for the elite class in Atlanta. My job involves transforming multi-million-dollar empty properties into breathtaking homes that billionaires fight over. It is a highly lucrative career, but to my husband Desmond and his incredibly pretentious family, I was just a glorified moving woman who hauled furniture around for a living. Desmond is a junior partner at a prestigious downtown law firm. He is handsome, polished, and completely obsessed with maintaining his image in the upper-middle-class Black society of Atlanta. He cares more about his tailored suits and his country club memberships than he ever cared about my true feelings. But the real problem was never just Desmond. It was his mother, Beatrice. Beatrice is the kind of woman who measures human worth by Greek letters, church seating assignments, and designer labels. She wears her Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority pin like a badge of absolute authority, and sits in the front row of our megachurch every single Sunday to ensure everyone sees her expensive custom hats. The Sunday dinner ambush was meticulously planned. I had spent all afternoon preparing a beautiful meal. The air in the penthouse was thick with the rich smell of roasted lamb and fresh rosemary. Desmond was relaxing in his leather armchair, swirling an expensive glass of bourbon that I had purchased for him with my own money. Beatrice was seated at the head of the table, a position she always aggressively claimed for herself the absolute moment she walked into my home. Her daughter Kiara and Kiara's husband Terrence were also present. Kiara is 29 years old and proudly calls herself a content creator, though her only real talent is spending money she does not have. Terrence is 31 and constantly chasing get-rich-quick schemes. His latest disaster was a cryptocurrency startup that completely tanked, leaving them buried in an avalanche of debt. I was just bringing the final tray of roasted vegetables to the table when Beatrice reached into her oversized designer tote bag. She pulled out the thick stack of legal documents and threw them onto the table. The heavy thud made everyone jump, and the edge of the folder violently clipped my crystal glass. Water pooled around the base of the expensive plates I had personally imported from Italy. I set the tray down slowly, my eyes moving from the spilled water to my mother-in-law's triumphant face. "What is this, Beatrice?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly level and calm. "This is your new reality," Zoya, Beatrice said, smoothing the lapels of her pristine white church suit. "You have been living in this gorgeous penthouse for 6 months now. Desmond pays the homeowners association fees every single month. Since my son is contributing to the upkeep of this property, it essentially makes this place a family asset. And since you are a part of this family, it is high time you started pulling your weight appropriately." I stared at her, genuinely trying to process the sheer audacity of her statement. "You want me to pay rent in the home I provided for us? It is not your home anymore, sweetheart." Beatrice sneered, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. "Desmond pays the association fees, which means the men of the family are handling the real estate. You just decorate it. The rent is $2,700 a month. You will deposit it directly into my personal account by the 1st of every month." Kiara and Terrence are going through a difficult financial transition right now because Terrence is restructuring his incredible digital assets. "The money you pay will go towards supporting your sister-in-law. That is how a real family operates." We support each other. I looked over at Kiara. She was busy checking her reflection in her phone camera, completely unbothered by the fact that her mother was explicitly extorting me to fund her careless lifestyle. Terrence smirked at me, helping himself to another piece of lamb as if he already owned the place. They genuinely believed they had outsmarted me. They thought they had cornered the poor, uneducated furniture mover into funding their extravagant and reckless habits. I turned my gaze to my husband. "Desmond," I said quietly, "are you going to say something about this? Are you seriously sitting there while your mother demands I pay rent to live in the home we share?" Desmond did not even have the decency to look me in the eye. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his bourbon, adjusted his gold cufflinks, and leaned back in his chair. He looked exactly like a man who believed he held all the power in the room. "Look, Zoya, let us be realistic here," Desmond said, using that patronizing lawyer voice he reserved for difficult clients. "You just haul furniture around for a living. You have a few good months when the housing market is hot, but your income is completely unpredictable. My law firm's salary provides the stability in this marriage. I pay the association fees, which legally binds me to this property's maintenance. Kiara and Terrence need help right now. You paying rent to my mother is the most logical way to handle things. Consider it your contribution to the family's legacy. Just sign the paper, Zoya. Do not make this a bigger deal than it needs to be." The betrayal washed over me cold and incredibly sharp. This was not a sudden decision. They had clearly planned this ambush together. Desmond had discussed my personal finances with his mother behind my back. He had maliciously belittled my career to his family, painting me as a struggling decorator who relied entirely on his legal salary to survive. He thought my business was a joke. He thought the $1,500 a month he paid for the homeowners association fee magically gave him ownership of the massive space we lived in. He had no idea that $1,500 was just a drop in the bucket. He did not know that my company brought in millions of dollars a year. He did not know that the true monthly maintenance cost for this building was over $25,000, all of which I paid quietly through my anonymous holding company. He thought the penthouse belonged to some faceless corporate landlord who was letting me live there at a major discount in exchange for interior staging services. I looked at the lease agreement resting in the puddle of spilled water. The thick paper was getting soggy at the edges. I looked at Beatrice, whose face was stretched into a victorious, arrogant smile. I looked at Kiara and Terrence, who were already whispering to each other, probably planning exactly how they were going to spend my hard-earned money on designer clothes and fake investments. Finally, I looked at Desmond, the man who had confidently promised to protect and cherish me, sitting there openly enabling his family's toxic extortion. Any other woman might have cried. Any other woman might have yelled, thrown the food, or demanded they all leave immediately. But I am not any other woman. My business is built on brilliant strategy, immaculate presentation, and knowing exactly when to reveal the hidden value of a property. I reached over and picked up my linen napkin. I dabbed carefully at the corners of my mouth, making absolutely sure not to smudge my lipstick. I folded the napkin perfectly into a neat square and placed it gently beside my plate. The dining room went dead silent. They were eagerly waiting for me to break down. They were waiting for me to surrender to their overwhelming pressure. Instead, I smiled. It was a bright, terrifyingly calm smile. "You know what, Beatrice," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "You make a very compelling argument about family property and financial contributions. If this apartment now belongs to the family, and I am required to pay $2,700 in rent to live here with my own husband, then I will just move back to my apartment." Desmond frowned, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. He lowered his bourbon glass to the table heavily. "What apartment?" he asked, his voice losing its confident edge. "Zoya, what are you talking about?" I did not answer him. I pushed my dining chair back from the table and stood up. I walked calmly over to the entryway console table where I had set my purse. It was an authentic black crocodile Birkin bag, a lavish gift I had bought for myself after closing a massive staging deal in Buckhead. Desmond had always ignorantly assumed it was a cheap knockoff I found online. I picked up the bag, slipping the strap gracefully over my arm. The sound of the heavy rain pouring down outside the floor-to-ceiling windows filled the tense silence in the room. Atlanta was experiencing a massive thunderstorm, the dark sky rumbling with electricity. "Zoya, sit back down right now," Desmond demanded, standing up quickly from his chair. His composed lawyer persona was slipping, replaced by raw panic. "You are not walking out of here. You have nowhere to go. Stop being dramatic and sign the paper." I paused at the front door, my hand resting firmly on the heavy brass handle. I looked back at the four of them. Beatrice was gripping the edge of the table, her eyes darting nervously between me and the unsigned lease. Kiara had completely stopped recording on her phone. Terrence had stopped eating. And Desmond looked completely baffled, realizing for the very first time that he might not actually hold all the cards. "Enjoy the lamb," I said softly. "I spent a lot of time preparing it." I opened the door and walked out into the hallway, pulling the door shut behind me with a firm, echoing click. I left the lease unsigned on the wet table. I left my husband standing in pure confusion. I walked out into the stormy Atlanta evening, stepping into the rain with absolute certainty. They thought they had backed a struggling decorator into a corner. They had absolutely no idea they had just declared war on a millionaire who owned the very ground they were standing on. And the trap I was about to set for them would ensure they lost absolutely everything. Monday morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my actual workspace. I sat at my massive drafting table, a custom piece carved from reclaimed walnut, reviewing a set of architectural blueprints for a $20 million estate in Buckhead. My mind was sharp, entirely unbothered by the dramatic exit I had made the night before. I was tracing the lighting schematics for a client's 2-story wine cellar when my phone chimed on the desk. It was an Instagram notification. Kiara was broadcasting live. I picked up my phone and tapped the alert. Kiara's face filled the screen. She was wearing a cheap neon pink lounge set that clashed violently with the sophisticated muted tones of my guest suite. She was pacing through the living room, holding her phone high to capture the sweeping views of the Atlanta skyline behind her. "Good morning to my beautiful followers," Kiara squealed into the camera, tossing her heavy synthetic braids over her shoulder. "Your girl has officially leveled up. We are broadcasting live from our brand new luxury penthouse. God is so good, y'all." She spun the camera around to showcase the kitchen. She ran her manicured acrylic nails across the pristine white surfaces. "Check out this authentic Calicut marble. Do you see the veining in this stone? And look up there." She pointed the camera toward the ceiling, capturing the brilliant sparkle of the lighting fixtures I had personally sourced from Paris. Baccarat crystal chandeliers, baby. We are living the absolute dream. Terrence wandered into the frame wearing a silk robe he had clearly dug out of Desmond's closet. He was holding a bottle of my vintage Laurent Perrier champagne, struggling to pop the cork. "Tell them who made this happen, babe," Terrence boasted, flashing a gold tooth at the camera. Kiara blew a kiss to the lens. "A massive shout-out to my incredible, successful lawyer brother Desmond. He surprised us with this gorgeous place because he knows how hard Terrence and I have been grinding on our new business ventures. He said this apartment belongs to the family now. Black excellence at its finest." I watched the viewer count tick up to a pathetic 42 people. Kiara was practically vibrating with unearned pride, completely oblivious to the fact that she was parading around a guest suite I used specifically to house visiting clients and international furniture vendors. She had no idea that every single piece of marble, every crystal, and every custom silk drape she was bragging about belonged to the very woman she had just helped chase out into the rain. Before I could even close the Instagram app, my phone screen shifted to an incoming call. The caller ID flashed Desmond's name. I let it ring 3 times, taking a slow, deliberate breath of the fresh orchids sitting on my desk before I finally pressed accept. "Where are you?" Desmond barked into the receiver. His voice was laced with an aggressive, frantic energy. The smooth, patronizing tone he had used at the dinner table the night before was completely gone. "I spent the entire night fielding questions from my mother because you decided to throw a childish temper tantrum and run out into a thunderstorm. I am exactly where I need to be," I replied, my voice smooth and entirely devoid of emotion. "You do not walk out on me, Zoya." he snarled, his anger echoing through the phone speaker. You embarrassed me in front of my mother. You embarrassed our family structure. Who do you think you are? You think you can just pack your little bag and disappear? I know you are probably sitting in some cheap motel off the highway crying your eyes out because you realize you made a massive mistake. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, running a hand over the smooth blueprint paper. I am not crying, Desmond. I am actually having a fantastic morning. Stop playing games, he demanded. You are going to pack your things, you are going to drive back here, and you are going to apologize to Beatrice. You disrespected the family hierarchy, Zoya. My mother was completely right. You need to contribute. You are just a glorified decorator. You move couches into empty rooms for a living. Your income is a joke. You need my financial stability to survive in a place like this. Do you honestly think you could afford a lifestyle anywhere close to this penthouse without my law firm salary backing you up? I let him rant. I let him expose every single insecurity and arrogant delusion he harbored. It was fascinating to hear the man I had married reveal how deeply he underestimated me. He genuinely believed his junior partner's salary, which barely cracked $200,000 a year, was the magical force keeping a roof over our heads. He had never bothered to look at the tax returns I filed separately through my corporate accountant. He had never asked how I managed to secure invitations to closed-door real estate galas, where the entry fee was more than his annual bonus. While Desmond was hyperventilating over the phone, a sudden sharp screech echoed in the background of his end of the line. It was Kiara. Her voice was muffled but unmistakable as she yelled from another room in the guest suite. Desmond, you have got to be kidding me, Kiara shrieked. I am trying to unpack my stuff in the master closet, but it is completely full of Zoya's cheap staging props. What are you talking about? Desmond yelled back, momentarily pulling the phone away from his mouth. I am looking right at it, Kiara complained loudly, her heavy footsteps stomping across the imported French oak floors. She has got all these weird blazers, some dusty old coats, and these tacky bags taking up all the custom shelving. I need space for my Fashion Nova hauls and Terrence's sneaker collection. You need to bag all this garbage up and throw it down the trash chute. It smells like desperation in here. I closed my eyes and let out a soft, amused sigh. The dusty old coats Kiara was referring to were a collection of vintage Chanel and pristine Max Mara boucle cashmere. The tacky bags taking up the custom shelving were a carefully curated selection of Hermes and rare Dior pieces I had acquired during sourcing trips to Europe. My sister-in-law, whose entire wardrobe was highly flammable polyester shipped in plastic bags, was demanding my high-fashion archive be thrown into an incinerator. Desmond brought the phone back to his ear. You hear that, Zoya? He said, his tone dripping with vindictive satisfaction. Kiara and Terrence are moving their things in today. My mother has officially designated this as the family headquarters. If you expect to be welcomed back into this marriage, you need to come clear out your junk from the closets. I am not going to let your staging props clutter up the space when my sister needs room to live. You are letting Kiara and Terrence permanently move into the suite, I asked, feigning a tone of mild surprise just to see how far he would dig his own grave. They are family, Desmond shot back, fully leaning into his self-righteous delusion. They need a place to stay while Terrence restructures his portfolio. You are going to start paying that $2,700 rent to my mother immediately to subsidize their living costs. And if you refuse, I am going to make things incredibly difficult for you. Is that a threat, Desmond? I asked softly. It is a promise, he countered. You think you can operate independently? You think you do not need me. If you do not agree to my mother's terms by noon today, I am going to completely cut off your access to our joint accounts. I will freeze your debit cards. I will lock you out of the online banking portal. You will not be able to buy a cup of coffee without asking my permission. Let us see how long your little independent decorator act lasts when you have absolutely zero cash flow. I stood up from my drafting table and walked gracefully toward my kitchen. The kitchen in my primary penthouse was a masterpiece of modern design, featuring matte black cabinetry, brushed brass hardware, and a massive waterfall island made of rare black absolute granite. It made the white marble kitchen in the guest suite look like a starter home. I walked over to my built-in espresso machine, a $10,000 piece of Italian engineering, and pressed the brewing button. The rich, dark scent of freshly ground espresso beans filled the air. "You are going to cut off my access to the joint account," I repeated, making sure to enunciate every word clearly. "Do not test me, Zoya. I am a lawyer. I know exactly how to legally secure my assets. You will be left with absolutely nothing." The espresso machine finished brewing. I picked up my custom ceramic mug, feeling the comforting heat radiating through the clay. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of the dark espresso. The flavor was bold, sharp, and perfect. "Go ahead," I said, my voice dropping to a cool, dangerous whisper. "What?" Desmond stammered, clearly thrown off by my complete lack of panic. I said, "Go ahead, Desmond," I replied smoothly. "Check the joint account. Check it right now. Call the bank. Go down to the branch in person. Do whatever you need to do to feel like the powerful, successful man your mother tells you that you are. Freeze the account. Zoya, stop playing these stupid games. I am not playing, Desmond. I am giving you my blessing. Go check the account." Before he could utter another arrogant word, I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red end call button. I tossed the phone casually onto the black granite counter. It clattered softly against the stone. I took another sip of my espresso, turned around, and looked out the massive windows at the sprawling Atlanta skyline. The storm from the night before had completely cleared, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming in the morning light. My heart was not racing. My hands were not shaking. I felt an overwhelming, powerful sense of absolute peace. I knew exactly what Desmond was going to do next. He was going to march down to that bank fueled by ego and his mother's toxic encouragement, fully expecting to wield his financial dominance over me. He was going to walk up to that teller with his chest puffed out, ready to lock away the thousands of dollars he assumed were sitting there. And then he was going to experience the most humiliating shock of his entire adult life. He was going to find out that the foundation of his arrogance was built on absolutely nothing. I smiled, savoring the bitter taste of the espresso, entirely unfazed by the storm raging next door. Let the games begin. Desmond strode through the heavy revolving glass doors of his elite downtown bank with the unearned confidence of a man who believed the world revolved around his tailored suit. He adjusted his silk tie, catching his reflection in the polished brass pillars. In his mind, he was the undisputed patriarch, the high-powered attorney who was about to deliver a swift and crushing lesson in financial reality to his ungrateful wife. He walked past the standard teller lines, bypassing the everyday customers, and headed straight for the private wealth management desks, tucked away in the quiet mahogany-paneled corner of the lobby. He approached the desk of a young, sharply dressed banker named Sarah, tossing his platinum credit card and heavy gold money clip onto the polished wood surface. "Good morning," Desmond said, using his most commanding courtroom voice. "I need to immediately freeze the joint checking and savings accounts under my name and my wife's name, Zoya. Furthermore, I want to initiate a wire transfer of the entire remaining balance into a newly created sole proprietorship account under my name only. I am restructuring my household assets, and I need her access completely revoked by the end of the business day." Sarah nodded quickly, intimidated by his aggressive demeanor. She picked up his card, verified his identification, and began typing rapidly on her sleek mechanical keyboard. "Of course, sir, I can process that freeze for you right away. Let me just pull up the joint portfolio to confirm the transfer amount." Desmond leaned back in the plush, leather guest chair, crossing his ankle over his knee. He was already visualizing Zoya standing at a grocery store checkout line, her card declining, the utter humiliation washing over her face. He imagined her frantic phone calls, begging for forgiveness, pleading for him to restore her access so she could buy gas for her car. He was going to make her sweat. He was going to make her realize exactly how fragile her little independent decorator lifestyle truly was, without his junior partner's salary holding up the walls. Sarah stopped typing. She squinted at her high-resolution monitor, her brow furrowing in confusion. She clicked her mouse a few times, refreshed the screen, and then slowly looked up at Desmond. Her professional smile had completely vanished, replaced by an expression of extreme, uncomfortable pity. "Sir, I have frozen the cards associated with the joint accounts," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a nervous whisper. But regarding the wire transfer of the remaining balance, are you absolutely certain you want to open an entirely new sole account for this amount? We generally recommend that for much larger sums due to the monthly maintenance fees on our premium accounts. Desmond scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. Just transfer the money, Sarah. I do not care about the maintenance fees. Move the entire balance immediately. Sarah swallowed hard. She turned her monitor slightly so Desmond could see the screen. All right, sir. I will prepare the transfer for the total remaining balance of exactly $812.45. The air in Desmond's lungs vanished. He stared at the glowing green numbers on the banking monitor, his brain completely short-circuiting. He blinked rapidly, assuming it was a typographical error. Excuse me? Desmond snapped, leaning forward and planting both hands firmly on the mahogany desk. There must be some kind of mistake in your system. Check the primary joint savings. Check the checking account. Look at the routing numbers again. I am a junior partner at a top-tier law firm. My annual bonuses alone are more than what most people make in a decade. I deposit a portion of my check into that account every 2 weeks. There should be tens of thousands of dollars in there. Sarah shrank back in her chair, nervously clicking through the transaction history. I am looking at the combined total of both the checking and the savings, sir. The exact total is $812.45. The transaction history shows that your automatic deposits go into this account, but they are almost immediately drafted back out to cover the homeowners association fee, the luxury car leases, the country club dues, and the utility bills for the penthouse. Desmond felt a cold, sickening sweat break out across the back of his neck. He snatched the printed ledger from Sarah's trembling hand and stared at the itemized list of expenses. He saw his deposits going in, and he saw them instantly vanishing to pay for the superficial trappings of the wealthy lifestyle he loved to flaunt. But where is Zoya's money, he demanded, his voice cracking with rising panic. My wife, where are her business deposits? Where is her income? Sarah looked at the screen again. Sir, there are no external deposits from any corporate entity under your wife's name in this account. The only deposits here are the ones coming from your law firm. Your wife has never routed her professional income through this joint portfolio. She only uses this account to purchase minor household incidentals like groceries and cleaning supplies. The illusion of control shattered into a million jagged pieces. Desmond grabbed his identification, turned on his heel, and practically ran out of the bank. He pushed through the revolving doors, stumbling out into the humid Atlanta air. He jogged to his leased BMW, threw himself into the driver's seat, and slammed the door shut. His hands were shaking violently as he gripped the steering wheel. He pulled out his phone and frantically dialed Zoya's number. It rang twice before clicking directly to her automated voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He called a third time, his chest heaving with full-blown panic. Voicemail. He dropped the phone into his lap, staring blankly out the windshield. A horrifying realization was dawning on him. He had absolutely no idea how his wife funded her lifestyle. He had always assumed she was just scraping by with a cute little hobby, making $40,000 or $50,000 a year, picking out throw pillows and painting accent walls. He had assumed she was secretly relying on his income to survive. But if her money was not in the joint account, and if his entire salary was being drained just to maintain his flashy image, how did she afford the designer clothes? How did she afford the lavish trips? How did she afford the expensive imported food she cooked every night? Desmond rested his forehead against the leather steering wheel, completely paralyzed. He could not call his mother. If he told Beatrice that the joint account was practically empty, she would realize he was not the financial king he pretended to be. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own, making utterly frozen by his own ignorance. Meanwhile, the scene shifts far away from Desmond's pathetic panic attack in a bank parking lot. The scene shifts back to Zoya, who is not sitting in a cheap motel. She is not sitting in her childhood bedroom crying over her ruined marriage. She is sitting in the primary master penthouse, sipping her rich espresso, surrounded by an unimaginable level of architectural opulence. The room Zoya occupies defies all logic of the space Desmond believes they own. She is relaxing on a custom curved velvet sofa in a living room that features double-height 30-foot ceilings. Massive walls of imported highly reflective smart glass look out over a private wrap-around rooftop terrace, complete with an infinity-edge pool and a curated botanical garden. A floating glass staircase leads up to a private mezzanine library, and the floors beneath her feet are rare wide plank Brazilian walnut. This is not a different building across town. This is the exact same high-rise building Desmond is currently rushing back to. In fact, Zoya is located directly next door to the unit Desmond and his family have just aggressively invaded. The breathtaking revelation is the architectural layout of the rooftop itself. When Zoya and Desmond first got married, she told him she had used her elite real estate connections to secure them a luxury penthouse at a massive discount. She handed him the keys to Unit C, telling him that his only responsibility was covering the $1,500 association fee to keep the management company happy. Desmond, blinded by his own ego and desperate to flex his status, never bothered to look at the actual building blueprints. He never bothered to investigate the anonymous management company, which was actually a shell corporation entirely owned by Zoya's holding firm. If he had ever stopped staring at himself in the mirror long enough to ask a real question, he would have learned that the entire top floor of the high-rise consisted of 3 massive units. Unit C, the supposedly luxurious 3,000-square-foot penthouse that Desmond thought he commanded, was actually just the designated guest suite of the complex. It was the smallest, least impressive unit on the rooftop, designed specifically to house visiting clients, international furniture buyers, and temporary staff. The real crown jewel was Unit A and Unit B, which Zoya had purchased gutted and combined into a spectacular sprawling 8,000-square-foot mega mansion in the sky. This was her true domain. This was the fortress she had built, with the millions of dollars she earned, commanding the elite luxury staging market of Atlanta. Zoya set her empty espresso mug down on a solid slab of polished obsidian that served as her coffee table. She stood up, her emerald silk robe flowing gracefully around her ankles, and walked toward the massive custom bookshelf spanning the entire eastern wall of her living room. The bookshelf was filled with rare architectural tomes, vintage design magazines, and imported sculptures. She reached out and pressed a completely hidden biometric fingerprint scanner concealed beneath the edge of a mahogany shelf. A soft electronic click echoed through the room. The heavy floor-to-ceiling bookshelf smoothly unlocked and swung open on silent industrial-grade hinges. Behind the bookshelf was a reinforced soundproofed steel door. Zoya pulled the heavy handle, cracking the door open just a few inches. The door led directly into a hidden utility hallway that connected her master penthouse straight into the primary walk-in closet of Unit C, the exact guest suite where Desmond's family was currently unpacking their cheap luggage. Through the cracked door, the soundproofing was temporarily broken. Zoya could hear the high-pitched, irritating sound of Kiara complaining about the closet space. She could hear Terrence loudly arguing on his cell phone, desperately trying to dodge his angry creditors by bragging about his new luxury living situation. They were behaving like absolute parasites, swarming through a space they believed they had conquered. Zoya smiled, a cold, calculating expression settling over her features. She closed the heavy steel door, silently engaging the deadbolt and swinging the massive bookshelf back into its locked position. The noise from the guest suite was instantly erased, returning her master penthouse to a state of absolute, tranquil silence. Desmond was currently speeding back to the building, armed with the terrifying knowledge that he was broke, while his family was aggressively claiming territory in a house they did not own. Zoya walked back to her desk, opening her laptop to monitor the internal security cameras she had installed throughout the guest suite. They had walked directly into her web, completely blinded by their own greed, and she was going to enjoy watching them destroy themselves piece by piece. Zoya adjusted the brightness on her massive curved monitor as a secure video conferencing application loaded. The screen split into 4 high-definition grids, revealing the faces of her most elite clients. There was a Nigerian oil magnate calling from his private jet, a London-based tech founder sitting in a sleek glass office, a prominent Atlanta real estate developer, and a legendary music producer dialing in from a recording studio in Los Angeles. These were not people who hired simple decorators. These were international billionaires who demanded absolute perfection, absolute discretion, and unparalleled architectural vision. They did not care about the cost. They only cared about securing the absolute best talent in the world, and that talent was Zoya. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, keeping my voice authoritative and calm. "Let us review the final staging blueprints for the Buckhead compound." For the next 45 minutes, I commanded the room with absolute precision. I walked them through the structural modifications of a $50 million estate, detailing the procurement of rare Italian marble, the installation of custom smart home technology, and the sourcing of 17th-century European artifacts. I am the founder and sole proprietor of Z Luxury Estates. My firm is the premier interior architecture and high-end staging company for the top 1% of the Black elite in Atlanta and across the globe. I employ a permanent staff of 50 highly skilled architects, artisans, and procurement specialists. I do not just arrange throw pillows on cheap sofas. I curate entire lifestyles for people whose net worth exceeds the gross domestic product of small countries. When the meeting concluded, the Nigerian magnate smiled warmly into the camera. "Brilliant work as always, Zoya. We will wire the remaining $4 million balance to your corporate account by the end of the business day." I thanked him, ended the call, and closed the application. I took a slow sip of my espresso, letting the rich caffeine sharpen my focus. The sheer irony of my reality, compared to Desmond's pathetic delusions, was almost too comical to bear. Desmond genuinely believed his junior partner's salary of $180,000 a year was the financial bedrock of our marriage. He strutted around the country club bragging about his modest legal victories, completely blind to the fact that his own wife could buy and sell his entire law firm before lunch. I opened a new tab on my browser and pulled up my private financial dashboard. I looked at the corporate structure of my empire. 5 years ago, long before I ever met Desmond, I created an anonymous holding company called Horizon Apex Management. Through that perfectly shielded LLC, I purchased the entire top floor of this luxury high-rise. I did not just buy a unit. I bought the absolute rights to the entire rooftop. When Desmond and I got married, I knew he had a fragile, highly inflated ego. He needed to feel like the powerful provider. He needed to feel like the man of the house. So I orchestrated a brilliant illusion. I told him I had used my industry connections to secure us a luxury penthouse at a massive discount. I handed him the lease agreement for Unit C, telling him that a faceless corporate management company was our landlord. I told him his only responsibility was paying the monthly homeowners association fee of $1,500. Desmond puffed out his chest and proudly accepted the responsibility. Every single month, he transferred $1,500 to Horizon Apex Management, entirely unaware that the money was going straight into a corporate bank account that I completely controlled. He thought he was housing us. He thought he was the master of his domain. He had no idea that my actual monthly maintenance costs for the entire rooftop complex exceeded $25,000. I paid for the private security detail, the structural insurance, the rooftop botanical garden upkeep, and the massive property taxes without ever mentioning a single word to him. I subsidized his fake wealthy lifestyle because I loved him and I wanted peace in my marriage. I allowed him to believe he was taking care of me. But the moment he allowed his mother to demand rent for a property I owned, that peace was permanently eradicated. I minimized my financial dashboard and opened my central security application. A grid of 9 high-definition camera feeds instantly populated my screen. When I combined the units and designated Unit C as the guest suite, I installed state-of-the-art, microscopic security cameras in every single room of that specific apartment to monitor visiting vendors and high-profile clients. The cameras captured flawless video and crystal-clear audio. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand, and watched the live feed from the guest suite living room. Kiara and Terrence had fully invaded the space. The visual was incredibly repulsive. They had dragged several cheap, oversized plastic suitcases into the center of the pristine Moroccan wool rug. Kiara was wearing her neon pink lounge set, walking around the kitchen and opening every single cabinet. Terrence was standing near the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, pacing back and forth with his cell phone pressed tightly to his ear. He looked frantic. He was sweating heavily, wiping his forehead with the back of his sleeve. I unmuted the audio feed for his camera, flooding my quiet office with the sound of his panicked voice. "Look, man, I told you I'm going to get the money," Terrence pleaded into his phone, his voice cracking with intense anxiety. "You have to give me another month. The crypto market just took a weird dip, but it is going to bounce back. I am good for the 1.5 million. You know I am good for it. I just need a little more time to restructure my assets. Do not send your guys to my mother's house. I swear I have a plan." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the sheer volume of his debt. Terrence did not just lose a few $1,000s in a bad investment. He owed $1.5 million to people who clearly used aggressive collection methods. He was a cornered rat, desperately trying to talk his way out of a trap. He abruptly ended the call, shoving his phone into his pocket and letting out a shaky breath. Kiara walked out of the kitchen carrying 2 crystal wine glasses and a bottle of wine she had brazenly stolen from the climate-controlled wine fridge I kept in the guest suite pantry. I zoomed in on the camera feed to look at the bottle. It was a vintage Chateau Margaux, a rare French wine that cost over $4,000 a bottle. I kept it specifically for a French client who frequently visited Atlanta. Kiara had absolutely no idea what she was holding. She twisted the corkscrew carelessly, ripping the cork in half before pouring the dark red wine into the crystal glasses. "Terrence, you need to relax," Kiara said, handing him a glass. "Desmond has our backs. He literally just handed us this penthouse. We are living like royalty right now. You can figure out the investor situation from here. We have time." Terrence took a massive gulp of the $4,000 wine as if it were cheap grape juice. "I am trying to relax, Kiara, but those guys do not play around. I need massive capital, and I need it fast. But you are right. Desmond is a lifesaver. I cannot believe he actually put his foot down with Zoya. It is about time somebody put that arrogant decorator in her place." Kiara laughed, a sharp, grating sound that echoed through the hidden microphones. "Did you see her face when my mom threw that lease on the table?" Kiara mocked, taking a sip of her wine. Zoya thought she was so untouchable with her little fancy purses and her imported plates. Mom humbled her completely. "Desmond is going to make her pay our rent, and she is going to do it because she has absolutely nowhere else to go. She cannot afford this lifestyle without my brother. She is going to come crawling back today begging for forgiveness." Terrence chuckled, looking around the luxurious room with greedy, calculating eyes. "You know, since Desmond is practically letting us own this place, maybe we can use it to our advantage. This penthouse has to be worth millions. A property like this carries a lot of weight. If I can just show my investors that I have access to this kind of real estate, it might buy me the extension I need." I sat back in my chair, turning down the volume on the security feed. The sheer audacity was staggering, but it was also incredibly predictable. They were parasites convinced they had stumbled onto a golden host. They truly believed Desmond held the keys to the kingdom, and they were already scheming to exploit property they had absolutely zero legal right to touch. My initial instinct was primal and immediate. I could pick up my phone right now and call my private security firm. I could have a team of heavily armed, suited men at the door of the guest suite in less than 10 minutes. I could watch through the cameras as my security forcefully dragged Kiara, Terrence, and their cheap plastic suitcases out into the public hallway. I could email Desmond the official property deed exposing his pathetic illusion of power and watching his entire world crumble before lunch. It would be swift, it would be violent, and it would be incredibly satisfying. But as I stared at the monitors watching Terrence pace the floor with greedy, desperate eyes, a much darker, much more sophisticated strategy began to form in my mind. Evicting them today would only embarrass them. It would be a temporary sting. Desmond would find a way to spin the narrative, playing the victim and telling his wealthy country club friends that his cruel, unstable wife had locked him out over a simple misunderstanding. Beatrice would run to her church group, weaponizing her tears and painting me as a vicious villain who destroyed her family. They would regroup, survive, and continue to exist with their toxic egos entirely intact. I did not want to merely embarrass them. I wanted to completely eradicate them. I wanted a destruction so absolute, so legally binding, and so public that they would never be able to show their faces in Atlanta high society again. Terrence was drowning in dangerous debt. Beatrice was obsessed with maintaining the illusion of massive wealth. Desmond was blinded by an ego that demanded he prove his superiority to his mother. They were a volatile combination of greed, desperation, and supreme arrogance. If I left them completely alone in that guest suite believing they were untouchable, they would inevitably take things too far. They would not just overstay their welcome, they would try to steal the property. I reached forward and minimized the security application. I decided to grant them the illusion of total victory. I would let Desmond believe he had frozen my non-existent funds. I would let Beatrice believe she was the new matriarch of my estate. I would let Terrence and Kiara drink my vintage wine and plot their desperate financial schemes. I would give them enough rope to hang themselves perfectly. I turned my attention back to the architectural blueprints on my desk, picking up my drafting pen with a steady, confident hand. I was not going to kick them out. I was going to sit in my hidden fortress, watching silently through the cameras as they meticulously built their own trap. They wanted to play a high-stakes game of real estate and power. I was going to let them play, and when the time was right, I was going to let the federal government drop the hammer. 2 days passed in absolute silence from my side. I ignored every single phone call, voicemail, and text message Desmond sent. Through my security feeds, I watched his initial arrogant fury morph into a restless, pacing panic. He had checked the joint account. He returned to the guest suite on Monday afternoon, looking completely defeated, immediately pouring a massive glass of my expensive bourbon. He did not tell Kiara or Terrence about the missing funds. His ego simply would not allow him to admit that the decorator wife he constantly belittled was the one holding the purse strings the entire time. He suffered in total silence, pretending he was still the absolute king of the castle. By Wednesday evening, the tension in the guest suite had reached a boiling point. I was sitting in my master office reviewing the final lighting schematics for the Buckhead project when a motion alert flashed on my secondary monitor. I clicked the notification and expanded the video feed for the guest penthouse living room. Beatrice sat rigidly on the white velvet sofa. Desmond stood near the windows, staring out with an empty look in his eyes. Kiara paced behind the kitchen island, chewing her nails. Terrence stood in the center of the room, sweating like a man facing a firing squad. The atmosphere was incredibly thick with anxiety. I leaned back in my chair, turned up the volume on my hidden microphones, and prepared to watch the show. "I cannot delay this any longer," Terrence announced, his voice trembling slightly. "We have a massive problem. A life-or-death kind of problem." Beatrice sighed loudly, crossing her arms over her chest. "Terrence, if this is about another one of your foolish cryptocurrency startups, I do not want to hear it. Desmond has already been generous enough to let you stay in this magnificent home. Do not bring your financial failures into my family's sanctuary. It is not just crypto." Terrence snapped back, finally losing his cool. "I owe money, Beatrice. A lot of money. To people who do not use collection agencies. They use physical violence." Kiara let out a sharp gasp, dropping her hands to her sides. "What are you talking about?" Terrence ran a hand over his face, sweating profusely. 6 months ago, I partnered with a private investment group to fund a commercial real estate flip-down in Miami. I guaranteed them a 20% return. I told them I had insider knowledge on the zoning laws. I took $1.5 million of their money. The room went completely silent. Desmond finally turned away from the window, his eyes narrowing at his brother-in-law. "You took $1.5 million from private lenders?" Desmond asked, his lawyer instincts suddenly kicking in. "What happened to the money, Terrence?" "The zoning laws did not change," Terrence admitted, his voice dropping to a pathetic mumble. "The property was completely worthless. The money is completely gone, and these investors are not bankers. They are dangerous. They told me if I do not return their initial $1.5 million plus a massive penalty fee by the end of the month, they are going to hurt me. And they know exactly where we live thanks to Kiara constantly bragging online." Kiara shrieked, blaming her husband for being a total fraud. Beatrice stood up from the sofa, her face red with pure outrage. "You absolute fool!" Beatrice hissed, outraged that he threatened her social standing. "Do you have any idea what this will do to my pristine reputation? I sit on the board of the church beautification team. If people find out my daughter married a broke, fraudulent criminal who owes money to thugs, I will be the laughingstock of Atlanta. You cannot let this family look broke, Terrence. You have to fix this immediately." "I am trying to fix it," Terrence pleaded, holding his hands up defensively. "But I do not have the cash. My accounts are completely empty. I have zero liquid assets. But we do have something else. Something incredibly valuable." Terrence slowly turned his head and looked directly at Desmond. "We have this penthouse." Desmond blinked, utterly confused. "What are you talking about, Ing? This apartment is not yours to use." Terrence stepped closer to Desmond, his eyes wide with a manic, desperate energy. "Hear me out, Desmond. A penthouse up here is worth at least $3 million easily. I have a connection at a private lending firm that does high-risk mortgages without asking questions. If we use this penthouse as collateral, I can pull a $2 million cash loan against the property in a matter of days. I can pay off the dangerous investors, keep $500,000 to launch my new digital agency, and then I will easily pay the mortgage back before anyone even notices." Desmond stared at him like he had grown a second head. "Are you insane? I cannot just take out a mortgage on an apartment. I only pay the homeowners association fees. The management company owns the deed." "That does not matter." Terrence waved his hand dismissively. "You are married to Zoya. She secured this place. Legally, any property acquired or maintained during the marriage is considered a marital asset. You are a lawyer, Desmond. You know how to draft the paperwork. You know how to bypass the standard red tape. You could generate a power of attorney sign on behalf of the marital estate and push this loan through your firm's elite banking connections. They will approve it immediately because of your status." I sat in my office, absolutely mesmerized by the sheer stupidity radiating through my computer screen. Terrence was completely unhinged. He was pitching federal bank fraud, identity theft, and massive real estate forgery as if it were a simple family favor. He fundamentally misunderstood marital property laws, assuming that because Desmond paid a tiny monthly fee, he somehow had the legal right to leverage a multi-million-dollar corporate asset. I waited to hear Desmond shut it down. I waited for my husband, the supposedly brilliant attorney, to loudly explain the severe criminal penalties for forging a mortgage document. Instead, Desmond stayed incredibly quiet. He was staring at the imported flooring, his mind racing. I knew exactly what he was thinking about. He was thinking about the $812 sitting in his bank account. He was thinking about the horrifying fact that he was secretly broke, living far beyond his means, and completely desperate for a massive infusion of cash to maintain his lifestyle. The terrible idea of securing $2 million, even fraudulently, was suddenly incredibly tempting to him. While Terrence babbled on about the mechanics of the loan, detailing how he would hide the funds in offshore accounts, once Desmond secured the cash, Kiara started planning out loud how she would spend the leftover $500,000. She was completely divorced from reality, mentioning a new luxury SUV and a lavish trip to Dubai to celebrate their financial victory. Beatrice saw the hesitation in her son's eyes and immediately pounced. She walked over to Desmond and placed her hands firmly on his shoulders. "Desmond, listen to me," she said, her voice dropping into a persuasive, venomous purr. "Terrence made a mistake, but we have to protect the family legacy. We cannot allow these thugs to ruin our good name. You need to do this. You need to secure that loan." "Mother, I could lose my license," Desmond whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of immense fear and dark temptation. "If the management company finds out, if Zoya finds out, it is massive fraud." "Forget about Zoya!" Beatrice snapped sharply, her eyes flashing with pure malice. "Zoya left you. She walked out of this house and disrespected this family. She is a nobody. She is a decorator who hauls furniture. You are a junior partner at a prestigious law firm. You hold the real power. Use your legal connections. Draft the paperwork. This house belongs to our family now. Zoya does not have the intelligence or the resources to stop you. If she tries to fight it, you can just bury her in legal fees until she surrenders." Desmond looked up at his mother. The deep humiliation he felt at the bank had deeply wounded his immense pride. He needed a massive victory. He needed to clearly prove to his mother, to his demanding family, and to himself that he was the powerful provider he constantly claimed to be. The empty bank account had terrified him, but this highly fraudulent plan offered him a golden ticket out of his secret financial ruin. If he pulled a $2 million mortgage against the property, he could easily save his brother-in-law, thoroughly impress his mother, and quickly siphon off hundreds of thousands of dollars to fill his own empty pockets. He sold out his law degree, his ethics, and his vows, all for the approval of a mother who would throw him under the bus in a heartbeat. "I can do it," Desmond finally said, his voice gaining a sudden arrogant strength. "I can draft the power of attorney. I know the vice president at a private wealth bank downtown. He loves me. He handles all my firm's major accounts. I can fast-track the underwriting process and completely bypass the standard appraisal since it is a luxury property. I will have the paperwork ready by tomorrow." Kiara squealed with genuine delight, running over to hug her brother. Terrence let out a massive sigh of relief, clapping Desmond on the back. "You are a lifesaver, man. I knew you would come through for us." Beatrice smiled proudly, patting Desmond's cheek. "That is my son, a true leader, a man who knows how to take absolute control and protect his family. We are going to secure this loan, and we are going to clearly show everyone in Atlanta exactly who we are." I sat in the dark silence of my master office, staring at the glowing monitors. A cold, terrifying smile spread slowly across my face. They had officially crossed the absolute line. This was no longer just a petty domestic dispute over a highly disrespectful mother-in-law. This was an active conspiracy to commit massive federal bank fraud. My husband had just openly agreed to completely forge legal documents to steal $2 million against my corporate entity. He had agreed to massively risk his entire professional career, his freedom, and his future simply because his incredibly toxic mother told him he was vastly superior to me. I reached forward and clicked a button on my recording software. A small red dot appeared in the corner of the screen, indicating that the entire horrific family meeting was being saved directly to my secure, heavily encrypted cloud server. I now had pristine high-definition audio and video of Desmond verbally agreeing to commit wire fraud and forgery. I had Terrence clearly admitting to a $1.5 million criminal swindle. I had Beatrice openly demanding they ruthlessly steal from me. The trap was no longer just carefully set. The trap was currently snapping completely shut, and they were the very ones happily pulling the lever. I leaned back in my leather chair, taking a slow sip of my water. I was not going to stop Desmond from drafting those documents. I was going to happily let him print every single highly fraudulent page. I was going to let him boldly sign his own name to a major federal crime. Let him completely forge the paperwork. Let him blindly feel like an absolute king. The eventual fall from his fictional throne was going to be absolutely, undeniably legendary. The next morning arrived with a crisp, bright energy that stood in stark contrast to the dark criminality brewing right next door. I sat at my massive granite island sipping a freshly pressed green juice, while my secondary monitor displayed the live security feed from the guest penthouse. Desmond had woken up early, vibrating with a toxic mix of panic and manufactured confidence. He was dressed in a crisp white dress shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, looking every bit the diligent attorney preparing for a major case. He marched over to the dining table and opened his firm-issued laptop. I zoomed the high-definition camera in directly over his shoulder. I could read every single word on his screen with crystal clarity. Desmond had logged into his prestigious law firm's secure virtual private network. He was actively using his firm's proprietary legal templates and elite banking credentials to draft a general power of attorney and a fraudulent deed of trust. He was naming himself as the authorized marital representative and primary financial stakeholder for Horizon Apex Management. He typed out the legal jargon with practiced speed, completely oblivious to the fact that the anonymous corporate entity he was attempting to defraud was entirely owned by his own wife. He genuinely believed he was outsmarting a faceless shell corporation. I watched as he pulled up a digital signature pad application on his screen. The document required the authorization of the LLC's listed managing director. He hesitated for only a fraction of a second. He did not look guilty, he did not look conflicted, he looked absolutely thrilled by his own audacity. With a swift, bold stroke of his digital stylus, he faked the signature. He had absolutely no clue he was forging his own wife's corporate alias. Desmond leaned back in his chair and let out a long, satisfied exhale. He was committing textbook wire fraud, identity theft, and massive real estate forgery using the pristine resources of his elite law firm. He printed the thick stack of documents on the guest suite's wireless printer, aligning the edges neatly as if they were genuine legal instruments ready to be filed with the county clerk. He blindly felt like an absolute king, convinced his legal prowess had just saved his family and secured his financial dominance. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the audio feed. Kiara sauntered into the dining area, dragging her feet and yawning loudly. She was wearing another cheap, flammable lounge set, this time in a blinding shade of neon green. She eyed the neatly stacked papers on the table, her eyes lighting up with unearned greed. "Is it done?" Kiara asked, pouring herself a massive glass of orange juice. "Did you get the money secured?" Desmond puffed out his chest, tapping the stack of forged documents with his index finger. "The paperwork is flawless. I am sending it over to the Vice President of Private Wealth today. With my firm's backing and my legal signature, the funds will be wired into my private account within 72 hours. I told you I had everything under control." Kiara squealed, doing a brief, ridiculous dance in the middle of the kitchen. "You are a genius, Desmond. Mom is going to be so proud of you." Desmond smiled, basking in the shallow praise. Then his expression hardened into a vindictive sneer as he turned his attention toward the master bedroom hallway. "Since this penthouse officially belongs to our family, now we need to clear out the rest of the garbage. Kiara, go into that master closet. Grab those heavy-duty black trash bags from the pantry. I want you to throw all of Zoya's remaining clothes, those dusty coats, and those tacky bags into the trash." Kiara's eyes widened with malicious delight. "Are you serious? I can throw it all away. I want it gone today," Desmond demanded, his voice dripping with supreme arrogance. "Drag every single bag down to the building's loading dock and leave them right next to the dumpsters. I do not want any trace of her left in my house. She thinks she can just walk out on me and disrespect this family structure. Let her wear the clothes on her back. She will come crawling back when she realizes she cannot survive without my salary." Kiara practically sprinted to the pantry, emerging seconds later with a fistful of thick black contractor bags. I sat in my office watching with total emotional detachment as my sister-in-law marched into the guest suite closet. The closet housed a secondary overflow collection of my wardrobe. It contained pristine Max Mara boucle cashmere vintage Chanel tweed blazers and a carefully curated selection of rare Dior handbags. Kiara showed absolutely zero respect for the delicate fabrics or the flawless craftsmanship. She aggressively ripped silk blouses from their velvet hangers. She shoved thousands of dollars worth of haute couture into the black plastic bags, crushing structured leather handbags beneath heavy wool coats. She was grinning the entire time, intoxicated by the false power of destroying something beautiful. Once she had filled 4 massive bags, she dragged them out the front door of the guest suite, scraping the heavy plastic across the imported French oak floors. I seamlessly switched my surveillance feed from the internal penthouse cameras to the building's exterior and service corridor system. I tracked Kiara's progress as she rode the service elevator all the way down to the subterranean level. She hauled the bags out into the concrete loading dock, dumping them unceremoniously next to a row of industrial recycling bins. She dusted off her hands, flipped her synthetics braids over her shoulder, and strutted back into the building, looking wildly victorious. 10 minutes later, a figure appeared on the loading dock camera. It was Marcus, the building's chief concierge. Marcus was a highly trained, impeccably discreet professional who catered exclusively to the top-tier residents. He was doing his routine perimeter check when he spotted the haphazardly dumped bags. I watched on the screen as Marcus cautiously approached the pile. He noticed a custom-embroidered garment bag peeking out of a tear in the cheap plastic. He recognized my initials instantly. He looked around the empty loading dock, utterly confused and highly concerned. He pulled his smartphone from his tailored suit jacket, clearly preparing to call me in a panic to report that my luxury items had been vandalized. Before he could dial my number, I picked up my phone and sent him a direct text message. I watched Marcus pause as his phone buzzed. He looked down at the screen, reading my message. Marcus, do not panic. I am perfectly aware of the bags on the loading dock. Take those bags directly to the commercial incinerator. Do not try to salvage anything. I have already ordered a completely new wardrobe from Paris. I have absolute zero use for clothes that have been handled by parasites. Marcus read the text, his professional composure immediately returning. He looked up directly at the security camera mounted above the loading dock doors, giving a swift, respectful nod. He typed a quick reply. Consider it done, Ms. Sterling. Thumbs up emoji. I smiled, setting my phone face down on the granite counter. I did not care about the clothes. The financial value of the discarded garments was a rounding error in my daily operational budget. I could replace every single thread with a single phone call to my personal shopper in Milan. What mattered was the absolute power play. Desmond and Kiara believed they were inflicting massive emotional and financial damage upon me. They believed they were punishing a helpless, financially dependent wife. They were entirely oblivious to the fact that they were simply taking out the trash for a billionaire who was already bored with last season's fashion. I turned my full attention back to my main workstation. The situation had officially escalated far beyond a petty domestic dispute over a highly disrespectful mother-in-law. This was no longer just about filing for a swift and silent divorce. This was a calculated multi-million-dollar federal crime. Desmond was using his position as an officer of the court to commit massive financial fraud. I opened a new, heavily encrypted folder on my secure corporate server. I titled it Project Checkmate. I began compiling a meticulous digital dossier with cold, mechanical precision. I was not acting like a scorned wife. I was acting like an apex predator securing its prey. I uploaded the high-definition video files of the family meeting, clearly showing Terrence admitting to his massive debt and Beatrice demanding the fraudulent loan. I uploaded the screen captures of Desmond actively drafting the fake power of attorney on his firm's network. I extracted the precise audio files of his arrogant boasts, detailing his exact plan to bypass the banking underwriters. I logged the precise timestamps of his unauthorized access to my corporate property records. Every single file was perfectly categorized, beautifully formatted, and legally devastating. Desmond thought he was a brilliant legal mind outsmarting the system. He thought his junior partner status made him completely untouchable in the city of Atlanta. He genuinely believed that his salary was the only thing keeping me from living on the streets. His hubris was so thick, so blinding, that he could not see the massive guillotine suspended directly over his neck. I reviewed the final digital dossier, ensuring every single piece of evidence was securely backed up to 3 separate offshore servers. I was preparing to completely dismantle his entire existence. When this bomb finally dropped, Desmond would not just lose his marriage. He would lose his law license, his reputation, his freedom, and every single ounce of pride he possessed. He would be facing severe federal prison time, and he would know exactly who put him there. I closed the encrypted folder and took a deep, satisfying breath. The new wardrobe from Paris would arrive by Friday. The federal consequences for Desmond would arrive shortly after. Thursday morning dawned with a thick, humid heat that settled heavily over the city of Atlanta. But inside my secure master penthouse, the climate was perfectly regulated and ice cold. I sat at my primary workstation, sipping a freshly pressed green juice, while my secondary monitor displayed the aftermath of the guest suite celebrations. Empty bottles of my most expensive champagne littered the kitchen island. Desmond was awake early, buzzing with a toxic, unearned adrenaline. He paced around the guest living room in his silk pajamas, dictating orders to his mother and sister, as if he were a feudal lord commanding his peasants. He was absolutely insufferable. I watched through the high-definition feed as he picked up his smartphone and drafted an email to the building's luxury management team. He aggressively demanded that the security credentials for the master penthouse be revoked and that the locks be changed by the weekend, citing his authority as the primary leaseholder. My lips curled into a sharp smile. I easily intercepted the email through the building's administrative backend, quietly redirected it to my personal trash folder, and sent him an automated generic response confirming receipt. He truly believed the building answered to him. He was completely intoxicated by the illusion of his own dominance. By Thursday evening, the atmosphere in the guest suite was practically vibrating with greed. Kiara was loudly browsing online for a brand new luxury SUV, while Terrence paced the floor counting down the hours until his violent creditors could be paid off. Desmond sat at the dining table polishing his expensive Italian leather shoes, mentally spending the $2 million he firmly believed he had already secured. I ignored their pathetic display and turned my full attention to finalizing the operational parameters for Friday morning. I opened my secure, heavily encrypted server and began systematically organizing the final evidence packets for the federal authorities. I opened my master ledger and dragged a highly classified document named A1_16.docx into the primary staging folder. This document contained the bank's final loan disclosure agreements, completely mapped with digital tripwires that would activate the exact moment Desmond applied ink to paper. I then compiled his forged identity proofs and fake corporate resolutions, saving them securely in a file named A2_16.docs. This specific file cross-referenced his law firm IP address with the exact digital timestamp of his forgery, leaving him absolutely zero room for any plausible deniability in a court of law. Next, I reviewed the communication logs I had established with the Financial Crimes Unit, saving the direct timestamped correspondence chain as a file named A3_16.docx. The federal authorities were fully briefed, holding a completely silent perimeter, and waiting strictly for my signal to move in. Finally, I pulled up the visual schematics for the bank itself. I opened a highly sensitive document named A4_16.docx, which contained the precise 4K camera placement blueprints and audio frequency mappings for the bank's elite executive boardroom. I spent an hour verifying the angles. Every single lens was perfectly calibrated to capture his face, his hands, and the fraudulent document simultaneously. The trap was a masterpiece of architectural ruin. Friday morning arrived with blinding sunlight. The security feed showed Desmond executing his morning routine with the meticulous care of a man preparing for a coronation. He chose a bespoke charcoal gray Tom Ford suit, a crisp white shirt, and a bold crimson silk tie. He stood in front of the full-length mirror for several minutes, adjusting his cuffs and practicing his most authoritative, commanding smile. He turned to Beatrice, declaring loudly that by noon he would be a millionaire in pure cash. Beatrice straightened his lapels, her face glowing with toxic pride, telling him he was the true, undisputed head of the family. Kiara practically begged for an advance on her shopping allowance, and Desmond arrogantly promised her a $50,000 wire transfer by the end of the business day. I left the high-rise 2 hours before Desmond's scheduled appointment. My private driver navigated the morning traffic flawlessly, taking me directly to the subterranean VIP parking garage of Piedmont National Bank. Philip Vance, the senior vice president of ultra-high net worth assets, was waiting for me personally by the private executive elevator. We exchanged a brief, respectful nod and rode up to the top floor in total professional silence. Philip led me down a carpeted hallway and into a darkened observation room. A massive pane of two-way mirror glass covered the entire right wall, offering a commanding, unobstructed view of the main executive boardroom. The room was designed for corporate intimidation. A massive, polished mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by heavy, ergonomic black leather chairs. Hidden 4K cameras were perfectly embedded in the ceiling and the corners of the room, while high-definition microphones were wired directly into the lighting fixtures above the table. I stood in the dark, my arms crossed over my chest, watching the empty room wait for its victim. At exactly 9:55, my phone buzzed with an alert from the lobby security team. Desmond had arrived. He strutted into the bank lobby, completely bypassing the regular teller lines and announcing his name to the executive concierge with an air of profound, nauseating self-importance. He was swiftly escorted up to the top floor. Desmond entered the boardroom like he owned the entire financial institution. He did not wait to be invited to sit down. He immediately took the heavy leather chair at the absolute head of the table. He spread his arms wide, resting his elbows aggressively on the polished mahogany, claiming the space with a sickening level of entitlement. He checked his luxury watch, leaning back and crossing his legs, waiting for the banker to arrive and hand him his fortune. Philip entered the room a moment later carrying a thick, premium leather folio. He played his role with devastating, Oscar-worthy perfection. He greeted Desmond with a firm, respectful handshake and a polite, deferential smile. He immediately began praising Desmond's swift legal work, complimenting the intense prestige of his law firm and inflating Desmond's ego to dangerous, atmospheric heights. Desmond ate up every single word. He leaned back in his chair, waving his hand dismissively, telling Philip that dealing with complex corporate real estate was simply child's play for a senior attorney of his caliber. He was practically vibrating with arrogance. Philip took his seat across from Desmond and asked a carefully planted, highly deliberate question about the LLC's managing director. He politely inquired if Zoya would be joining them for the final authorization signatures, just to ensure all marital asset protocols were strictly followed. Desmond laughed. It was a sharp, brutally condescending sound that echoed perfectly through the hidden speakers in my dark observation room. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, and looked Philip directly in the eye. "My wife is just a decorator," Desmond sneered, his voice dripping with absolute contempt. "She handles the aesthetic choices, the throw pillows, and the paint colors. I handle the serious financial architecture of our marital assets. I hold total, irrevocable power of attorney over her little staging businesses, because she simply does not possess the intellectual capacity or the legal fortitude to understand high-level commercial finance. Do not worry about Zoya. She does exactly what I tell her to do." I stood in the darkness on the other side of the glass, completely perfectly still. I watched my husband casually assassinate my character, my intelligence, and my worth. He was sitting in a building where I personally held liquid accounts worth more than his entire law firm's annual operating revenue, calling me intellectually deficient. He was using his law degree to steal from me while simultaneously degrading me to a man whose multi-million-dollar mansion I had recently designed. I felt absolutely no sadness. I felt no heartbreak. I felt only the cold mechanical thrill of absolute checkmate. Philip nodded sympathetically, hiding his disgust with brilliant professional composure. He opened the leather folio and slid a massive, intimidating stack of federal bank documents across the mahogany table. He pointed directly to the bottom of the first page. Philip explicitly informed Desmond that these documents represented a federally backed, heavily regulated $2 million commercial loan. He clearly loudly stated for the audio recording that by signing these specific forms, Desmond was legally attesting under penalty of perjury and federal wire fraud that he was the sole authorized signatory and legal owner of Horizon Apex Management. Desmond did not even blink. He did not bother to read the fine print. His eyes were completely glazed over with blinding greed. He was thinking entirely about the cash. He was thinking about paying off the Miami thugs, buying a brand new sports car to parade around Atlanta, and thoroughly crushing me in divorce court using my own stolen money. Desmond reached inside his suit jacket and pulled out a heavy gold-plated Mont Blanc fountain pen. He clicked the cap off with a sharp snap. He rested the expensive gold nib against the thick cream-colored bank paper. In the observation room, I stepped closer to the glass. I watched the 4K cameras silently pan and zoom, locking their high-definition focus directly onto the document and his moving hand. Desmond signed his name with a bold, aggressive flourish. He flipped the page. He effortlessly forged my corporate alias. He flipped the next page. He signed again. He pulled a heavy metal stamp from his briefcase and applied his own official legal notary seal directly to the fraudulent documents. A breathtaking career, ending violation of foundational legal ethics. Stroke by stroke, page by heavily monitored page, he meticulously built his own federal prison sentence. The executive boardroom was completely silent, except for the harsh, rapid scratching of his pen against the paper. It took him exactly 4 full minutes to legally sign away his entire life, his freedom, and his future. When he reached the final signature line on the last page, he capped his fountain pen with a sharp, incredibly satisfied click. He pushed the thick stack of completed paperwork back across the mahogany table toward Philip, leaning back in his chair with a triumphant exhale. "It is done," Desmond declared, a greedy, victorious smirk plastered across his face. The marital assets are fully leveraged. Go ahead and wire the funds directly to the private routing number I provided in the initial intake packet. I expect the transfer to clear by early afternoon. Philip gathered the papers slowly. He tapped the edges of the stack against the table, aligning them with calm, terrifying precision. He looked down at the forged signatures, verifying the ink was dry. Then, without saying a single word to Desmond, Philip slowly lifted his head and looked directly up at the two-way mirror. I reached forward and pressed a small illuminated button on the audio console in the observation room. My voice piped directly into the boardroom's overhead surround sound speakers, echoing from above, smooth, cold, and entirely devoid of mercy. The funds will not be wired, Desmond. Desmond froze instantly. The victorious smirk vanished from his lips like it had been violently slapped away. His head snapped up, his eyes darting frantically around the empty corners of the massive boardroom, trying to locate the source of the voice. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving his skin looking pale, clammy, and suddenly terrified. "Who is there?" Desmond demanded, his voice cracking, his arrogant posture instantly collapsing into defensive panic. "What is going on, Philip? What is this?" I did not answer him. I released the audio button and turned to the bank's chief of security, who was standing quietly in the shadows directly behind me. I looked him in the eye and gave a single silent nod. The security chief immediately raised his radio to his mouth, authorizing the armed federal financial crimes units currently waiting in the lobby to advance to the top floor. The trap was closed. "Wait!" I commanded, my voice slicing through the dark tension of the observation room. I raised a single hand, signaling the security chief to halt. He paused, his thumb hovering over the transmission button on his radio. He looked at me, waiting for my directive. "Call them off," I instructed, my eyes locked on Desmond's terrified face through the two-way mirror. "Stand the federal agents down. Let him walk out of this building believing he has completely won. He is hosting a massive celebration at my property tonight. I do not want him arrested in a quiet, empty bank. I want him in handcuffs in front of every single person he has ever tried to impress." The security chief gave a slow, understanding nod and relayed the stand-down order to the lobby. Inside the boardroom, Philip Vance proved exactly why he was a top-tier executive. He casually waved a hand, letting out a smooth, practiced chuckle. He smoothly apologized to Desmond, dismissing my disembodied voice as a known frustrating glitch in the building's antiquated intercom system, claiming lines from the lower administrative floors occasionally bled through the speakers. Desmond, still sweating and visibly trembling, bought the lie instantly because his fragile ego absolutely demanded it. He could not fathom that a trap had been set. Philip handed him a stamped, finalized loan approval packet, complete with a dummy wire transfer receipt showing $2 million pending for Monday morning. Desmond snatched the papers, his arrogant posture immediately returning. He shook Philip's hand, completely oblivious to the fact that he was thanking the man who had just handed him a federal prison sentence, and strutted out of the bank with his chest puffed out. Fast forward to Friday evening. The atmosphere inside my guest penthouse was vibrating with a chaotic, manufactured energy. Beatrice had wasted absolutely no time. Believing they were about to be $2 million richer by Monday, she had organized a massive, lavishly catered affair that she pretentiously dubbed a Black Excellence Gala. She had undoubtedly financed the entire extravagant party on high-interest credit cards, fully confident that Desmond's fraudulent influx of cash would easily cover the exorbitant costs. It was meant to be a grand celebration of Desmond's supposed legal and financial triumph, as well as a launch party for Terrence's entirely fictional new business venture. I sat at my primary workstation in the master penthouse, watching the live security feed with profound disgust. The guest list Beatrice had assembled was a curated who's who of Atlanta's elite. She had invited local politicians desperate for campaign donors, prominent HBCU alumni, mega church pastors, and high society socialites. The room was packed with people dressed in expensive evening wear, sipping champagne and mingling under the ambient lighting. Beatrice was aggressively parading through the crowd, loudly cementing their status in the community. She was introducing Desmond to city council members as a brilliant real estate mogul and junior partner, ensuring every single guest understood that the Wilson family had officially arrived at the pinnacle of wealth. The sheer, unfiltered irony of the event was physically nauseating. They were using my personal hard-earned assets as props for their pathetic illusion of wealth. I watched through the cameras as caterers circulated the room serving delicate hors d'oeuvres on my imported Italian crystal platters. My custom hand-carved dining tables were being used as makeshift bars, heavily loaded with premium liquor. Guests were admiring my curated museum-quality art collection, while Beatrice stood nearby loudly and confidently claiming she had personally selected each piece during a lavish summer trip to Europe. She was accepting compliments on my flawless interior design as if she had engineered the entire aesthetic herself. Chiara was a completely different spectacle of delusion. She was strutting around the room acting like the undisputed lady of the manor. She was wearing a cheap, poorly stitched knockoff of a designer gown, the synthetic fabric catching the light terribly and clinging awkwardly to her frame. Yet she held her chin high, snapping her fingers and barking condescending orders at the hired waitstaff as if she were born into royalty. She cornered a group of wealthy socialites loudly bragging about the new luxury SUV she was planning to purchase on Monday, completely unaware of how incredibly foolish she looked. Desmond was holding court near the floor-to-ceiling windows. He held a crystal tumbler filled with my most expensive aged scotch. He was surrounded by a group of prominent businessmen and a local pastor giving unsolicited, highly arrogant financial advice. He was gesturing broadly with his free hand, explaining the aggressive mechanics of leveraging commercial real estate to build generational wealth. He looked incredibly proud of himself. He firmly believed he was the absolute smartest man in the city. He believed he had conquered me, secured his family's legacy, and established himself as a financial titan. I watched him take a confident sip of the scotch, laughing loudly at his own joke. He was savoring the absolute peak of his fictional empire. I turned away from the security monitors. The time for passive surveillance was officially over. I walked into my expansive dressing room to prepare for the final act of this meticulously orchestrated play. I did not rush. I moved with the cold, deliberate precision of an executioner. I bypassed my standard business attire and selected a breathtaking, custom-tailored emerald green silk gown. The rich, vibrant fabric draped flawlessly against my skin, commanding immediate attention and exuding pure, unadulterated power. I stepped into a pair of black razor-sharp Christian Louboutin stilettos. I pinned a vintage platinum and diamond brooch to the lapel of the gown, a stunning, heirloom-quality piece that radiated quiet, undeniable authority. My hair was styled in an immaculate, sleek chignon, pulling my features into sharp focus. I applied a deep, commanding shade of red lipstick, checking my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. I did not look like a heartbroken, discarded wife. I looked exactly like the billionaire owner of the building. I looked like a woman who could dismantle a man's entire existence with a single word. I walked over to my marble vanity and picked up a sleek, matte black leather folder. It was heavy with the weight of absolute destruction. Inside, securely organized, were the authentic property deeds, proving my sole ownership of the entire penthouse floor. It contained the stamped, legally binding eviction notices for every member of the Wilson family. It held the high-definition screenshots of Desmond actively forging my signature on the bank documents. And most importantly, it contained the finalized signed federal arrest warrants. I pulled my smartphone from my clutch and opened a direct encrypted text thread with the captain of the Federal Financial Crimes Unit. They were currently parked in unmarked black SUVs in the building's subterranean parking garage, completely invisible and awaiting my command. "Move to the service elevators," I typed. "Hold in the corridor outside the guest penthouse. Wait for my signal." The response came through instantly. "In position. Awaiting your word." I slipped the phone back into my clutch. I grasped the black leather folder firmly in my left hand. I walked out of my master's suite and stepped into the private marble-lined hallway that connected my residence to the guest penthouse. The muffled sounds of the gala echoed through the thick mahogany doors. I could hear the jazz music playing, the clinking of glasses, and the loud, arrogant laughter of my soon-to-be ex-husband. They thought they had won. They thought they had buried me. They were currently toasting to my demise using my own champagne standing in my property and wearing the fraudulent armor of my success. I placed my hand on the polished brass handle of the guest penthouse doors. I took one final steadying breath, letting the cold fury settle into a perfect razor-sharp calm. I pushed the heavy doors open, stepping out of the shadows and directly into the blinding light of their stolen celebration. It was time to crash my own home. The heavy brass doors yielded smoothly to my touch, swinging inward to reveal the blinding spectacle of my own hijacked property. I crossed the threshold, stepping off the private marble corridor and directly into the pulsating heart of the guest penthouse living room. The sheer volume of the gathering hit me instantly. A live jazz quartet was stationed near the floor-to-ceiling windows, their smooth, upbeat tempo washing over a sea of designer suits and sequined evening gowns. Waiters in crisp black uniforms weaved through the tight clusters of Atlanta's elite, balancing silver trays of caviar and carrying crystal flutes filled with my vintage champagne. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne roasted truffle hors d'oeuvres and the overwhelming stench of unearned arrogance. I did not rush. I walked forward with the slow, deliberate stride of a predator entering a highly populated feeding ground. The heels of my black Louboutins clicked sharply against the imported French oak floors, a sharp, rhythmic sound that managed to cut through the ambient noise of clinking glasses and boisterous laughter. My emerald green silk gown caught the ambient light of the crystal chandeliers shimmering like liquid glass with every step I took. At first, only the guests positioned near the entryway noticed me. A prominent city councilman deep in conversation with a megachurch pastor paused mid-sentence. His eyes widened as he took in my presence, recognizing immediately that I was not a hired server or a +1. The undeniable authority radiating from my posture, the platinum and diamond brooch resting on my lapel, and the black leather folder gripped firmly in my hand, commanded absolute attention. A ripple of confusion quickly morphed into stunned silence. The hush spread through the massive room like a physical wave moving from the doorway all the way to the panoramic windows. The jazz quartet, sensing the sudden suffocating drop in conversation, faltered. The upright bass player stopped plucking his strings. The saxophonist pulled the instrument from his lips. The pianist hit one final jarring chord that hung awkwardly in the heavy air before the music screeched to a complete and absolute halt. Over 100 pairs of eyes were now locked entirely on me. The crowd instinctively parted down the middle, creating a wide, clear path that led directly to the center of the room. Standing at the very end of that impromptu runway was my mother-in-law. Beatrice was wearing a heavily beaded, overly structured gold gown that looked far more suited for a tacky pageant than a high society gala. She held a crystal champagne flute in one hand and a cocktail napkin in the other. The moment she registered my face, her expression contorted from manufactured high society grace into an ugly, visceral mask of pure hatred. Her jaw dropped, her eyes bulging with disbelief. She practically threw her glass onto a passing waiter's tray, spilling champagne over the rim, and began marching directly toward me. She moved with aggressive, stomping steps, practically foaming at the mouth as she closed the distance between us. She stopped less than 2 feet away, her chest heaving, her face flushed a dark, furious crimson. "How did you get past security?" Beatrice demanded, her voice shrill and echoing loudly in the dead silent room. I simply stared at her, maintaining a perfectly blank, utterly unbothered expression. I let the silence stretch, forcing everyone in the room to hang on to her unhinged display. "You have some nerve showing up here," Beatrice continued, her voice rising to a frantic, hysterical pitch as she gestured wildly around the lavishly decorated room, begging for a plate of food at my son's celebration. "Who let you into this building? You do not belong here. This is a private, high-class event for successful people. You are nothing but a discarded, broke decorator trying to leech off our family's blessing. Get out of my house before I have you physically thrown out into the street." The surrounding guests exchanged deeply uncomfortable glances. A few of the high society socialites whispered behind their hands, clearly shocked by Beatrice's complete lack of decorum. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I merely tightened my grip on the black leather folder, observing her the way a scientist observes a frantic trapped insect. She had just publicly claimed ownership of my multi-million-dollar property in front of the city's elite. It was a beautiful, catastrophic mistake that I was going to make her eat word by bitter word. Before I could deliver a single syllable of my response, a chaotic blur of neon green pushed its way through the crowd. Kiara shoved past a prominent local politician, nearly knocking the drink out of his hand, and inserted herself directly between Beatrice and me. She was wearing her cheap, poorly stitched knockoff dress, the synthetic fabric riding up awkwardly on her thighs. But what made the display truly pathetic was the smartphone gripped tightly in her hand. The harsh, blinding light of her camera flash was activated, pointed directly at my face. She was live streaming the entire confrontation to her pathetic social media followers, entirely convinced she was about to capture the ultimate humiliation of her brother's ex-wife. "Look who crawled out of the gutters, y'all!" Kiara yelled directly into her phone's microphone, her voice obnoxiously loud and dripping with ghetto, fabulous entitlement. She shoved the phone closer to my face, ensuring the camera captured every angle of my emerald gown. The broke ex-wife trying to ruin our family's blessing. She heard my brother had just secured a $2 million bag, and suddenly she wants to come sniffing around the penthouse. Look at her showing up uninvited to our mansion. Tell the people how desperate you are, Zoya. Tell them how you came crawling back because you have nowhere else to go. I looked directly into Kiara's camera lens. A slow, chilling smile graced my lips. I wanted her to broadcast this. I wanted her to document every single second of their supreme arrogance. She was freely broadcasting their claims of ownership over my property, their boasts about Desmond's fraudulent $2 million loan, and their unhinged hostility to a live public audience. Her live stream was not a weapon against me. It was a digital, irrefutable confession broadcasting in real time. "Keep recording, Kiara," I said, my voice smooth, melodic, and terrifyingly calm. "I want your followers to see absolutely everything that is about to happen tonight. Make sure you get a good angle." Kiara scoffed, rolling her eyes and turning the camera back to herself. "You hear that, y'all? She is delusional. She really thinks she is doing something right now." At that moment, the crowd shifted once more. Desmond finally decided it was time to make his grand entrance. He casually strolled through the parted sea of guests, projecting the manufactured aura of a benevolent, deeply successful patriarch. He was wearing his bespoke charcoal suit, his chest puffed out, holding a glass of my aged scotch. He offered reassuring, fake smiles to the local politicians and pastors as he passed them, clearly trying to play the magnanimous, highly rational man managing his hysterical ex-wife. He stopped beside his mother and sister, placing a gentle, restraining hand on Beatrice's shoulder, as if calming a protective guard dog. He looked me up and down, his eyes briefly catching on the vintage diamond brooch pinned to my silk lapel. A flicker of confusion crossed his features, likely wondering how a supposedly broke woman could afford such a breathtaking piece of jewelry, but his blinding hubris quickly pushed the thought away. "Zoya, stop embarrassing yourself," Desmond said, pitching his voice perfectly so that the entire room could hear his deep, patronizing tone. He sounded like a disappointed parent addressing a highly irrational child. "I understand that seeing us thrive is difficult for you. I understand that walking away from my stability was a massive mistake, and now the financial reality of your situation has set in. But crashing a private gala is not the way to handle this. You are making a fool of yourself in front of my guests." He casually reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek silver money clip. It was thick with $100 bills, no doubt a cash advance he had recklessly pulled against his credit cards in anticipation of the bank wire he believed was coming on Monday. He peeled off 5 crisp $100 bills with slow, deliberate movements, ensuring every prominent pastor and business leader in the room witnessed his grand display of charity. He extended the cash toward me, a sickeningly pitiful look plastered across his face. "Here is $500, Desmond said, his voice echoing loudly in the silent room. "Go rent a motel room and let the adults handle business. Go buy yourself a warm meal. Call my assistant on Monday, and I will see if I can arrange a modest monthly stipend so you do not have to resort to showing up at my home begging for handouts. Now please, take the money and leave before I am forced to have security escort you off the premises." I did not reach for the money. I did not blink. I stood perfectly still, letting his hand hang awkwardly in the space between us. The sheer magnitude of his delusion was a masterclass in narcissistic collapse. He stood in the center of a penthouse that I owned, surrounded by luxury furniture that I had purchased, offering me a pitiful $500 while simultaneously confessing to a $2 million bank fraud on his sister's live stream. The silence in the room stretched until it became physically agonizing for the guests to endure. I slowly lowered my gaze, looking at the $500 clutched in his outstretched hand, and then raised my eyes back to meet his arrogant stare. The trap had been flawlessly set. The audience was perfectly captivated. The federal agents were waiting in the shadows of the service corridor just outside the brass doors. I slowly lifted my left hand, raising the sleek black leather folder so that it caught the light of the chandelier. Desmond, I began, my voice ringing out with crystal clarity slicing through his manufactured reality like a sharpened blade. You seem to be under a very severe, legally fatal misconception about who owns this airspace. I took a single measured step forward, closing the distance between us. The heels of my Louboutins clicked like a ticking clock counting down the final seconds of his freedom. Beatrice tightened her grip on her champagne flute, her knuckles turning white. Kiara kept the camera aimed directly at my face, her sneer faltering slightly as the absolute absence of fear in my demeanor began to unnerve her. Desmond's outstretched hand wavered for a fraction of a second, the $500 trembling slightly in his grip. He opened his mouth to issue another patronizing command, attempting to regain control of the narrative in front of his elite guests. But he was out of time. His reign as the king of a stolen castle had officially expired. I held the black folder up, feeling the heavy, beautiful weight of his total destruction resting perfectly in the palm of my hand. I did not reach for the crumpled $500. I let his hand hang there, suspended in the heavily perfumed air, a pathetic monument to his own fragile ego. I maintained unbroken eye contact with Desmond, watching the initial flash of triumph in his gaze slowly curdle into uncomfortable uncertainty. The silence stretched heavy and suffocating, wrapping around the room until the ambient hum of the party completely died away. From the corner of my eye, I spotted a young waiter in a crisp black uniform navigating the edge of the crowd. He was carrying a silver tray loaded with crystal flutes of my vintage champagne. Unlike Desmond and his parasitic family, the building staff knew exactly who I was. The waiter caught my gaze, his eyes widening in sheer panic. He immediately altered his route, stepping around a prominent city councilman to approach me. He lowered his head respectfully, extending the silver tray with trembling hands. I reached out with my free hand, my fingers wrapping elegantly around the stem of a crystal flute. I did not break eye contact with my husband as I lifted the glass to my lips. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The champagne was perfectly chilled, crisp, and familiar. I swallowed, lowering the glass, and let a small, dismissive smile curve the edges of my red lipstick. Desmond's outstretched hand slowly dropped to his side. The $500 hung uselessly against his tailored slacks. His performative pity vanished instantly, replaced by a dark, simmering rage. He opened his mouth to speak, to assert his dominance over the woman he believed he had financially conquered, but Beatrice beat him to the punch. My mother-in-law could not fathom the disrespect. Her entire reality was built on the illusion of superiority, and my calm, unbothered demeanor was a direct threat to her fragile narrative. She stepped forward, her heavy beaded gown rustling aggressively. Her face turned a dangerous shade of purple, the veins in her neck bulging against her heavy gold jewelry. She practically foamed at the mouth, her jaw trembling with sheer outrage. She pointed a rigid jewel-encrusted finger directly at my face, her voice echoing shrilly across the vaulted ceilings. "How dare you!" Beatrice shrieked, entirely abandoning any pretense of high society grace. "How dare you stand there drinking our champagne after my son practically offered you charity? You have some nerve showing up here begging for a plate of food at my son's celebration." She spun around, scanning the perimeter of the massive living room. Her frantic eyes locked onto the main entrance where two massive suit-clad security guards stood near the brass doors. They were the building's elite private security team men hired specifically to manage the ultra-wealthy residents and handle any potential physical threats with extreme prejudice. Beatrice snapped her fingers at them violently, her tone dripping with the venom of a tyrant commanding her foot soldiers. "You two," Beatrice barked, pointing her trembling finger back at me. "Throw this squatter out immediately. She is trespassing on my son's property. Drag her out by her hair if you have to, but get her out of my sight." Kiara, sensing the ultimate climax of her social media broadcast, shoved her smartphone even closer to my face. The bright ring light attached to her phone case illuminated my features harshly. She angled the screen so she could capture both my face and the approaching security team in the background. "Look who crawled out of the gutters, y'all!" Kiara yelled into the microphone. Her voice a grating performative screech designed for maximum viral engagement. The broke ex-wife trying to ruin our family's blessing? She thought she could sneak into the VIP section, but my mama is having security drag her out right now. Watch this live eviction, folks. The crowd of elite guests shifted uncomfortably. A few of the wealthy socialites covered their mouths, whispering furiously to one another. The local politicians stepped back, eager to distance themselves from the impending physical altercation. The entire room held its collective breath, the tension so thick it felt like static electricity crackling in the air. At the entryway, the two massive security guards stepped forward. Marcus and Reynolds were former military contractors built like freight trains and moving with lethal coordinated precision. Their heavy tactical boots thudded against the French oak floors, a synchronized rhythmic march that echoed through the silent penthouse. Desmond crossed his arms over his chest, his arrogant smirk returning in full force. He tilted his chin up, entirely prepared to watch the mother of his impending child be physically manhandled and dragged out of the building. Beatrice crossed her arms as well, mirroring his victorious stance, a smug, repulsive grin stretching across her face. Kiara kept the camera steady, providing running commentary on my impending humiliation. The guards reached the center of the room. They stopped precisely 2 feet in front of me. The crowd leaned in, waiting for the physical grab, waiting for the brutal reality of an eviction to shatter my calm facade. Instead, Marcus and Reynolds executed a flawless synchronized pivot. They did not reach for my arms. They did not attempt to restrain me. They stepped past me, one moving to my left and the other to my right. They flanked my sides, turning their massive frames to face Desmond, Beatrice, and Kiara. They crossed their large hands professionally in front of their tailored suits, adopting a wide, highly protective stance. Then, in perfect unison, these two lethal men bowed their heads slightly in my direction. "Awaiting your orders," Boss Marcus, the head of security, said, clearly his deep voice carrying absolute, unquestionable authority across the silent room. The atmosphere in the penthouse simply shattered. The collective gasp from the elite crowd was audible. The high society socialites stopped whispering. The politicians stared in utter bewilderment. The dynamic of power in the room flipped so violently and completely that it left a physical vacuum in its wake. Beatrice staggered backward, her jaw dropping open in sheer, unadulterated shock. She looked from Marcus to Reynolds and then to me, her brain completely short-circuiting as it tried to process the reality of what had just occurred. What Beatrice stammers, her voice cracking, completely devoid of its previous tyrannical edge. "What are you doing? I gave you an order. Grab her, throw her out. I will have management fire both of you. I will have you stripped of your credentials." Marcus did not even blink. He kept his eyes locked straight ahead, completely ignoring her hysterical demands. He answered to one person in this building, and she was currently wearing an emerald green gown. Kiara lowered her smartphone slightly, her live stream suddenly capturing the exact moment her entire social standing disintegrated. The comments rolling rapidly across her screen shifted from mocking me to questioning why the security team was bowing to the so-called broke ex-wife. Her performative bravado evaporated, replaced by a creeping, sickening dread. But it was Desmond whose reaction was the most magnificent to behold. His arrogant smirk did not just fade, it fell off his face like a heavy stone. His arms, previously crossed in triumph, slowly dropped to his sides. His eyes darted from the security guards to the black leather folder in my hand, and finally up to my face. The absolute terrifying truth began to penetrate his blinding hubris. His highly analytical legal mind finally started putting the pieces together. The security team did not work for some generic faceless building management company. They worked for the owner of the building. If they answered directly to me calling me boss, that meant I was not a simple tenant. It meant I was not a discarded wife renting a space. It meant I owned the airspace they were currently breathing. The color drained from Desmond's face so rapidly he looked physically ill. The glass of my expensive scotch trembled in his hand, the amber liquid sloshing over the crystal rim and staining his pristine white cuffs. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a sudden suffocating terror, realizing that the woman he had just casually dismissed as intellectually deficient was holding the leash to the very men he thought he commanded. I let the silence stretch for 5 agonizing seconds, allowing the sheer magnitude of their humiliation to saturate the room. The elite guests, quick to recognize true authority, had completely turned their silent judgment onto the Wilson family. The local politicians were already looking for the exits, recognizing political poison when they saw it. I took one final, slow sip of the vintage champagne, savoring the crisp finish. Terrence was standing slightly behind his mother, sweating profusely in his ill-fitting suit, his eyes darting frantically toward the service elevators. He looked absolutely terrified, like a rat trapped in a maze. I extended my arm gracefully toward him. I did not look at him. I kept my gaze locked dead onto Beatrice's horrified face. "Take this," I commanded quietly. Terrence flinched, stepping forward automatically like a highly conditioned servant. He reflexively took the empty crystal flute from my outstretched hand, holding it awkwardly against his chest like a hired busboy. I shifted my focus fully onto Beatrice. I let the cold, mechanical superiority radiate from every syllable I spoke, ensuring my voice carried to the very back of the massive living room. "You wanted to throw a party in my guest house, Beatrice?" I asked, my tone laced with a dark, terrifying promise. "You wanted to invite the city to celebrate your son's fictional empire." I tapped my manicured fingernail against the cover of the black leather folder, the sharp sound echoing like a gunshot. "Let's give your guests some real entertainment." I raised my left hand, extending a single finger toward the ceiling. In the discreet glass-paneled AV booth hovering above the rear of the penthouse, my personal tech director caught the signal. Up until this exact second, the massive 80-inch OLED screens mounted across the living room had been looping a nauseating slideshow of Desmond. Images of him posing in front of leased sports cars, standing at podiums, and shaking hands with people he barely knew flashed in a continuous loop of fabricated success. With one keystroke for my tech director, the screens went completely black. The upbeat jazz music that had been quietly resuming its tempo was abruptly cut off, replaced by the sharp electric hum of a microphone powering on. I stepped forward, accepting a sleek wireless microphone handed to me by Marcus. I tapped the grill once. The sound echoed with booming authority across the vaulted ceilings. Every eye in the room darted from me to the massive screens as they suddenly flared back to life. But they were no longer showing Desmond. Displayed in glorious razor-sharp 4K resolution was a highly classified, legally binding document. It was the master property deed for the entire top floor of the high-rise. I watched the local politicians and wealthy socialites squint slightly, their eyes adjusting to the harsh white background of the legal paperwork. I had highlighted the crucial sections in bright, undeniable yellow. I let the silence hang for a moment, allowing the elite readers in the room to process the bold print. Property owner, Z Luxury Estates, LLC. Sole managing proprietor, Zoya Wilson. The collective intake of breath from the guests was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. "This penthouse does not belong to your son," I stated, my voice echoing through the silent, shocked room. It was smooth, conversational, and utterly lethal. "It belongs to me. In fact, I own this entire floor. I own the master suite where I sleep, and I own this guest unit where you are currently standing." I turned my gaze slowly toward Beatrice. Her face had drained of all color, leaving her looking like a deflated, aging ghost. The heavy gold jewelry she wore suddenly looked cheap and ridiculous against her ashen skin. "That $2,700 you aggressively demanded for rent?" I continued, my voice dripping with cold amusement. That pathetic sum would not even cover the cost of the imported Italian marble floor you are currently standing on. It would barely cover the monthly maintenance fees for the private elevator you rode up here. You are not hosting a high society gala in your son's mansion. You are throwing a noisy, unauthorized party in my spare bedroom. The reaction from the crowd was instantaneous and brutal. High society guests operate on a strict currency of wealth and reputation. They tolerate arrogance only when it is backed by genuine capital. The moment they realized Desmond was a fraud, a squatter living off his wife's covert empire, the atmosphere turned toxic. Prominent HBCU alumni began murmuring in shock, stepping away from the open bar as if the drinks themselves were tainted. A city councilman, who had just been praising Desmond's business acumen minutes prior, actually turned his back and began whispering furiously to his aide. The elite of Atlanta were realizing they had been duped into attending a fake celebration hosted by absolute charlatans. Desmond's chest heaved. The perfectly tailored charcoal suit he wore suddenly looked like a straitjacket. His entire identity, built meticulously on the subjugation of my worth, was being dismantled on a macroscopic scale. He looked out at the sea of judging faces, his peers, his mentors, his potential clients, and saw his reputation burning to ash. He stepped forward, his hands trembling with a mixture of sheer panic and desperate rage. He tried to project the commanding, authoritative voice of a senior attorney, but it came out as a strangled, pathetic stutter. "This is a lie!" Desmond shouted, his voice cracking violently. He pointed a shaking finger at the massive screens. "Do not listen to her. She is hysterical. Even if her name is on that LLC, we are married. Georgia is an equitable distribution state. Her corporate assets are my marital assets. I have full legal rights to this property as her husband. I am the head of this household. What belongs to her belongs to me." He looked around the room, pleading with the wealthy businessmen to validate his outdated, desperate grasp at patriarchal control. A few of the older men shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the legal terminology, but sensing the trap I had laid. I did not argue with him. I did not raise my voice. I simply smiled, a razor-thin curve of my lips, and gave another sharp nod toward the AV booth. The screens behind me instantly shifted. The property deed vanished, replaced by an ironclad 50-page legal document. The heading was massive, undeniable, and devastating. Prenuptial agreement and corporate asset protection matrix. I had the tech director zoom in directly on paragraph 4, section B. The text was magnified so large that even the guests standing in the far corners of the penthouse could read every single word. I spoke clearly into the microphone, narrating his absolute demise. "You are a junior partner at a law firm, Desmond, but clearly your reading comprehension is severely lacking," I said, my voice echoing relentlessly. "Before we got married, you signed a waiver relinquishing all rights to any corporate entity I founded prior to or during our marriage. You signed away your rights to Z Luxury Estates LLC. You have zero equity. You have zero legal claim. You are, by all legal definitions, a temporary guest with absolutely no standing." Desmond's eyes darted rapidly across the screen, reading his own signature digitized and displayed for the entire city's elite to see. He had signed the documents years ago, completely dismissing my small staging business as a trivial, unprofitable hobby. He had never bothered to read the clauses because he never believed I would amount to anything worth stealing. His own profound arrogance had blinded him to the legal fortress I was building right under his nose. "You tricked me!" Desmond hissed, his face contorting into a mask of pure, ugly panic. "You hid the true value of your assets. This is fraud. I can have this agreement thrown out in court. I am a lawyer. I will destroy this document." "You are welcome to try," I countered smoothly. "But considering the document was drafted by the senior partners at your own law firm, I highly doubt you will find much success." A collective audible gasp echoed through the room. The local politicians and wealthy socialites were practically vibrating with the scandal of it all. Kiara was still holding her phone up, her mouth hanging open. The live stream comments were exploding, a rapid-fire cascade of laughing emojis and brutal mockery directed squarely at the Wilson family. Beatrice was hyperventilating. She grabbed the edge of a marble console table to steady herself, her gold dress shimmering awkwardly as she trembled. She looked at Desmond, her golden child, her supposed savior, and saw only a hollow, defeated man. Desmond Beatrice choked out her voice, barely a whisper. Tell them she is lying. Tell them you own this. Desmond could not answer her. He was staring at the screens, completely paralyzed by the catastrophic reality of his situation. He was publicly exposed. Every boast he had made tonight, every arrogant claim of wealth and dominance, was now a proven, humiliating lie. But I was not finished. The prenuptial agreement was simply the appetizer. The true destruction was yet to come. I signaled the AV booth one more time. The screens shifted again. This time there was no legal jargon. There were no dense paragraphs to read. Instead, a series of crystal-clear, high-definition photographs flashed across the monitors. It was Desmond. The first photo showed him sitting in the private executive boardroom at Piedmont National Bank earlier that exact morning. The 4K resolution captured the arrogant smirk on his face perfectly. The second photo zoomed in on his hands, clearly showing him holding his expensive Mont Blanc fountain pen. The third photo was the absolute kill shot. It was a close-up of the bank document itself, clearly displaying my forged signature alongside his official notary stamp. The entire penthouse erupted into a frenzy of shocked whispers. The pastors covered their faces. The politicians immediately began backing toward the elevators, desperate to avoid being associated with a documented federal crime. I raised the microphone back to my lips, my voice slicing through the rising panic in the room like a scalpel. You see, Desmond, I stated, my tone dropping to a cold, predatory cadence. I did not just come here tonight to expose you as a fraud to your friends. I came here to ensure you never practice law in the state of Georgia ever again. Desmond stumbled backward, bumping into a waiter and sending a tray of crystal flutes crashing to the floor. The sound of shattering glass echoed like a punctuation mark to his ruined career. He looked at the photos of his forgery, the undeniable proof of his felony, and the last remnants of his sanity completely evaporated. You set me up! He screamed, his voice cracking wildly as he pointed a shaking finger at me. You let me sign those papers. You orchestrated this whole thing. You are a monster. I lowered the microphone, handing it back to Marcus without breaking eye contact with my husband. I stepped closer to him, the physical distance between us now less than 3 feet. He smelled of scotch and cold sweat. I am not a monster, Desmond, I said quietly. My voice meant only for him and his horrified family. I am simply the architect of your consequences. You wanted to leverage my assets to pay off Terrence's violent gambling debts. You wanted to steal $2 million from my holding company to finance your fragile ego. You built the trap yourself. I just provided the cameras. Terrence, upon hearing his debts mentioned aloud, let out a pathetic, strangled whimper. He dropped the empty champagne glass I had handed him earlier. It hit the French oak floor and shattered, joining the wreckage of his brother's ego. Beatrice began to wail. It was a loud, theatrical sound full of manufactured victimhood. She threw her hands in the air, crying out to the remaining guests that I was a wicked, vindictive woman destroying her innocent boys. But no one was listening to her. The elite of Atlanta were already hitting the elevator buttons, fleeing the penthouse like it was a sinking ship. I opened the sleek black folder in my hand. I pulled out a single crisp sheet of paper bearing the official seal of the Fulton County Sheriff's Office. I held it out toward Desmond. This is an official notice of immediate eviction, I stated, my voice echoing clearly over Beatrice's dramatic wailing. You have exactly 15 minutes to gather whatever cheap synthetic belongings you brought into my property and vacate the premises. If you are not out of this building by the time that clock strikes 10, Marcus and Reynolds will physically throw you into the street. Desmond stared at the eviction notice, completely broken. His eyes were vacant, his shoulders slumped. The arrogant, commanding patriarch was entirely gone, replaced by a terrified, cornered criminal who finally realized he had lost everything. Your 15 minutes starts right now, I ordered. I turned my back on him, my emerald gown sweeping elegantly across the floor. I walked toward the panoramic windows, ignoring the chaotic scrambling of my soon-to-be ex-husband and his parasitic family as they frantically rushed to pack their bags. The trap had closed perfectly. The execution was flawless, and the night was only just beginning. The night was indeed just beginning. I stood by the panoramic windows, feeling the cool glass against my back as I watched the roaches scramble. Desmond was hyperventilating, his eyes darting frantically toward the exits, but I was not entirely finished. I raised my hand, catching the eye of my tech director in the AV booth one last time. Before anyone leaves, I announced, my voice commanding the fleeing guests to freeze in their tracks. There is one final piece of entertainment I believe everyone needs to see. The massive 80-inch screens flickered. The still images of Desmond's forgery vanished, replaced instantly by a high-definition silent security video feed from Piedmont National Bank. The footage played with crystal clarity. It showed Desmond sitting in that plush leather chair, but the frame widened to reveal a detail I had kept hidden until this very second. Terrence was there. The video clearly showed Terrence slipping into the executive boardroom, sweating and jittery. He hovered over the mahogany table, taking the gold fountain pen from his brother. Desmond pointed directly to the secondary guarantor lines on the $2 million fraudulent mortgage papers. Terrence, needing the money so desperately to pay off his violent Miami creditors, eagerly scribbled his name right next to the forged signatures. The silent footage captured them sharing a greedy conspiratorial handshake. They had both tied their legal identities to a massive federal felony. As the video looped back to the beginning, playing their crime on a continuous broadcast for the elite of Atlanta, the heavy oak doors of the guest penthouse did not just open. They were thrust apart with absolute unyielding force. A highly coordinated team of men and women in tactical gear flooded the entryway. They were not local Atlanta police officers responding to a noise complaint. The bold, bright yellow letters across their armored vests read FBI and U.S. Marshal. These were federal investigators specializing in major wire and bank fraud, and they moved with terrifying, undeniable efficiency. The lead investigator stepped forward, holding a thick stack of federal warrants. He did not care about the designer gowns, the jazz quartet, or the local politicians pressing themselves against the walls to stay out of the way. He locked his hard gaze directly onto Desmond and Terrence. Desmond Wilson and Terrence Wilson. The federal agent barked, his voice carrying effortlessly over the shocked gasps of the high society crowd. You are both under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal bank fraud, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. The agents moved in instantly. They grabbed Desmond's arms, twisting them firmly behind his tailored charcoal suit jacket. They slammed heavy steel handcuffs onto his wrists, the sharp metallic click echoing like a gavel striking a sound block. Desmond's legs gave out. He tried to speak, to invoke his status as a junior partner at a prestigious law firm, to claim he knew the district attorney, but the words died completely in his throat. His entire legal career, his pristine reputation, his carefully curated arrogant identity, all of it was instantly and permanently obliterated in front of the very people he had invited to worship him. Terrence fared even worse. The moment the federal marshals grabbed his arms, he completely collapsed. He dropped to his knees, bawling loudly like a terrified child. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the heavy sweat on his brow. He wailed about his debts, begging the federal agents to let him go, screaming hysterically that Desmond had forced him to sign the papers. The agents ignored his pathetic display, hauling him to his feet by his armpits and frog-marching him toward the service elevators. Beatrice watched her two sons being treated like common criminals. Her entire manufactured empire was burning to the ground right in front of her eyes. The reality of her situation finally shattered her delusional arrogance. She stumbled forward, her heavily beaded gold dress catching awkwardly on the imported rug, and fell directly to her knees at my feet. She reached out, her hands shaking violently, black mascara ruining her expensive makeup as tears streamed down her cheeks. "Zoya, please." Beatrice sobbed, her voice a shrill, desperate plea that silenced the remaining guests. "Please, Zoya. I am begging you. Tell them it is a mistake. Tell the federal agents it was just a misunderstanding between a husband and a wife. You cannot let them take my boys away. We are family. You cannot do this to us." I looked down at her. I felt absolutely no pity, no remorse, and no sympathy. I looked at the woman who had spent years degrading me, plotting my financial ruin, and sipping my imported champagne while treating my home like her personal kingdom. I looked at the woman who had happily cheered as her son attempted to steal my entire livelihood. I was going to give you 30 days to move out, I said coldly, my voice devoid of any emotion projecting clearly across the room. That is the standard legal courtesy for unwanted tenants. But since you invited all your friends here to celebrate my downfall, consider this your eviction notice. You have exactly 10 minutes to vacate my property before my security throws your belongings off the balcony. Beatrice gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Kiara, who had dropped her phone entirely, stood frozen against the wall, her eyes wide with sheer terror. Marcus, I called out, not taking my eyes off my weeping mother-in-law. The massive head of security stepped forward instantly, his hands clasped firmly in front of him. Yes, boss. Start the clock, I instructed smoothly. When 10 minutes have passed, I want every single item they brought into this penthouse tossed over the railing. If they refuse to leave, escort them out physically. Marcus nodded, pulling a heavy black stopwatch from his pocket and clicking the timer. The sharp beep signaled the definitive end of the Wilson family's reign. Beatrice scrambled to her feet, her previous high society grace entirely abandoned. She shrieked at Kiara to start grabbing their bags. They ran toward the guest bedrooms, their footsteps heavy and frantic, tearing through the pristine hallways of my property, like frightened animals fleeing a burning forest. The remaining elite guests did not wait to be addressed. The politicians, the pastors, and the socialites surged toward the main elevators, desperate to escape the toxic fallout of the Wilson family's absolute destruction. They kept their heads down entirely and thoroughly humiliated by their association with such profound fraud. I stood alone in the center of the massive living room, smoothing the silk fabric of my emerald gown. I picked up my crystal flute of champagne from a nearby table, took a final victorious sip, and listened to the beautiful, chaotic sound of my enemies packing their bags. 6 months later, the dust had completely settled over the Atlanta skyline, and the absolute destruction of the Wilson family was a matter of permanent public record. Justice, I discovered, is a dish best served flawlessly chilled, and the ensuing months delivered a feast of karmic retribution that was nothing short of spectacular. The local media had a field day with the story. The very socialites and politicians who had attended that disastrous penthouse gathering became the eager audience to the family's brutal, extremely public downfall. Let us start with Desmond, my former husband, the man who genuinely believed he was a legal titan, entitled to the fruits of my labor, was officially and permanently disbarred by the state of Georgia. His pristine reputation evaporated overnight, replaced by the crushing reality of federal indictments. He is currently sitting in a holding facility, awaiting sentencing. The federal prosecutors have firmly outlined a mandatory minimum of 5 to 10 years in federal prison for mortgage fraud, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. The bespoke charcoal suits he prized so highly have been indefinitely traded for a standard-issue jumpsuit. There are no mirrors in his cell to reflect his manufactured ego, and there are no sycophants left to feed his delusions of grandeur. He is a disgraced attorney, entirely stripped of the power he tried to wield against me. His downfall was significantly expedited by his own flesh and blood. Terrence, ever the cowardly opportunist, did exactly what I knew he would do when faced with hard time. The moment the federal marshals placed him in a stark interrogation room, he folded completely. He took a plea deal without a second of hesitation, and immediately turned state's evidence, flipping on Desmond and Beatrice to save his own skin. He testified in excruciating detail about the forged signatures, the desperate scramble to cover his violent Miami gambling debts, and the entire fraudulent scheme they had concocted together. The legendary Wilson family loyalty completely dissolved the moment it was tested by the threat of a federal penitentiary. Terrence is currently serving a reduced sentence in a minimum security facility, forever branded a traitor by the very people he tried to impress. Then there is Kiara. Her viral live stream, the one she arrogantly initiated to broadcast my supposed humiliation, ended up being subpoenaed as prime digital evidence for the prosecution. Her followers abandoned her overnight, recognizing a massive fraud when they saw one. The brand deals vanished. The social media sponsorships evaporated into thin air. Today, Kiara's influencer dreams are entirely dead. She is currently working a minimum wage retail job at a discount clothing store in a dying strip mall. Instead of holding a ring light and demanding free luxury items, she spends her days scanning barcodes, folding cheap synthetic sweaters, and dealing with irate customers. She is stripped of the unearned entitlement she once wore so proudly, forced to live in the harsh reality of actual hard work. But perhaps the most poetic justice of all fell upon Beatrice. Her catastrophic plunge from high society, Grace was absolute and unforgiving. The elite social clubs she had desperately clawed her way into immediately revoked her memberships. The mega-church pastors, terrified of the public relations nightmare her family had caused, formally excommunicated her from their congregation. She became an absolute pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about at the very galas she used to attend. Stripped of Desmond's financial support and shunned by the city's elite, Beatrice was forced to move into a cramped, poorly lit one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. There are no crystal chandeliers there. There are no imported French oak floors. She spends her days sitting in a tiny linoleum-floored kitchen surrounded by the bitter ashes of her own blinding arrogance, fully aware that she orchestrated her family's total ruin. As for me, my reality looks quite different. I am sitting peacefully on the expansive wraparound terrace of my primary penthouse. The evening air is warm and perfectly still. The Atlanta skyline stretches out before me, a glittering sea of lights that I can observe without a single trace of anxiety. I am wrapped in a thick, luxurious cashmere robe, holding a delicate porcelain cup, and taking a slow, comforting sip of chamomile tea. The silence up here is magnificent. It is the pure, unfiltered sound of total ownership and undisturbed peace. My divorce was finalized with record speed. Desmond, sitting in a federal holding cell and facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence, had absolutely no legal leverage to contest a single clause. The judge signed the final decree without hesitation, severing my ties to that parasitic family permanently. My prenuptial agreement held firm, perfectly protecting every single asset account and property under my name. Z. Luxury Estates, LLC, remains entirely untouched, an impenetrable fortress of my own making. In fact, the business is booming more than ever. The high-profile exposure of my design and property management skills brought in a flood of elite new clients, all eager to work with the woman who flawlessly outsmarted a team of fraudsters. I lean back in my teak lounge chair, feeling the soft evening breeze against my face. The journey through betrayal, manipulation, and gaslighting was exhausting, but it forged an armor around my spirit that is completely unbreakable. I learned the true value of my own strength. I learned that silence is not a sign of weakness, but a strategic tool for gathering evidence. I looked directly forward, speaking not just to the empty air, but to anyone who has ever been made to feel small in their own life. Never shrink yourself to fit into a room built by people who didn't lay a single brick. And never let someone demand rent in a house you own. If you caught your in-laws trying to steal your home, would you have dragged them to court? Or would you have set a trap to let them walk out in handcuffs like I did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories of setting boundaries that no one can cross.